This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It's 3 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I was with John Sopel last night, star, of course, of The Newsagents, an author of a rather splendid new book, Strangeland, about which you can hear more on Full Disclosure next week, I think. No, this week, possibly. And it was while reading his book, in preparation for interviewing him on stage in Richmond last night, that I came across a phrase I think you're going to hear quite a lot on this programme. He described the Labour victory in the last election as a loveless landslide. And that's such a great little distillation of much bigger issues, isn't it? A loveless landslide. And the lovelessness is probably best illustrated or best proved by the speed with which Keir Starmer's approval ratings have plummeted. He won an election almost on sufferance, a vote to get rid of the Tories after plumbing all manner of democratic depths, rather than a vote that was enthusiastically inviting Labour into Downing Street. That's not new. I don't think you could describe Tony Blair's victory in 1997 as a loveless landslide, but certainly in the run-up to it, you had an awful lot of analysis explaining that this was just a consequence of Tory fatigue. John Major had run out of road. The Conservatives had been in power since 1979 and the country was ready for a change. So all of that would apply. But loveless landslide seems to me to be a sobriquet particularly applicable to Keir Starmer's situation. So if I were trying to make a list of objectively agreeable, as in things to which we can agree, as opposed to agreeable as a synonym for pleasant, objectively agreeable statements, that Keir Starmer's victory was a loveless landslide. The existence of people who love him doesn't prove I beg your pardon, doesn't disprove the accuracy of that statement. So things we can say with a degree of confidence that most people are going to agree with, whether it describes them or not. It's going to be a sort of majority description. Keir Starmer's victory was a loveless landslide. What else can you say with a degree of certainty? Well, in the case of print media, you can say that for whatever reason, they are so spooked and terrified by a Labour government that they will turn an acorn into a mighty oak of alleged scandal. Whether it's because they're terrified of what might be unearthed by the investigation into COVID contracts that Rachel Reeves has announced, whether it's because they're terrified of Labour's determination to clamp down on non-dom taxpayers, which would play directly into the personal life of the owner of the Daily Mail, whether it is just a sort of general commercial belief that by terrifying people about the unspecified threat of leftists and leftism, you will hang on to a few more readers as the entire medium of print newspapers withers on the national vine. I don't know, but I think we can all agree about that generally speaking, the conversation set by the Daily Mail, the Daily Telegraph, and for those people who still read it, the Daily Express, is very much of a piece, the lens, and the Times as well. The Times has dived in on some of the stuff that we're going to discuss today as well. And you can say that with some confidence, that the lenses are distorted. A lot of the journalism is bent. It's the same sort of journalism and journalists that were comfortable with the corrosive impacts of Brexit, comfortable with the moral depravity of Boris Johnson, not just comfortable with, but positively adoring of Liz Truss's fiscal event or mini budget or whatever you prefer to call it. I can't bring myself to remind you of the front pages and the comment pieces with which Liz Truss's aberration was greeted. But suffice to say that they read more like birthday messages than they did like political journalism. Finally, a true Tory budget, I think, was on the front of the Daily Mail. The best budget of my life, wrote some chancellor in the Telegraph. And then, of course, 2 weeks later, they just all pretended that it had never happened. So you can say that with a degree of confidence as well. And then you've got the, what would you call it? The seepage. That's not a very nice word, is it? It makes you think perhaps of the health warnings on the back of American crisp packets. But you then have the seepage from the bent media, because the rest of us, in a sense, look at the world through the lenses that they have distorted. I have little choice when I come to work in the morning. than to get an idea of the lie of the land from the most popular newspapers in the land. And that will be a view that is conducted through the distorting lens. There isn't really a left or a centrist media to speak of. You might cite The Guardian, but I mean, it's a turgid business at the best of times, apart from Adrian Charles's column and Marina Hyde and Nesreen Malik and some of the commentators. It certainly doesn't do for the Labour Party the job that the Telegraph or the Mail or the rest of them do for the Tory Party. And then you've got the other consequence of seepage, which is thinking, well, maybe this matters more than I think it does. And that's where I am at the moment. I caught myself this weekend thinking, well, maybe this matters more than I think it does. The sheer weight of the Fourth Estate cannot be wrong. Perhaps it is massively important who paid for Bridget Phillipson's birthday party. I get an idea of how bent the print media can be. The Sun carries a column today accusing Lewis Goodall of having interviewed Bridget Phillipson about her birthday party without mentioning that he had been at her birthday party. Anyone who listened to Lewis's show on Sunday will know it was the first thing he mentioned at the very top of the interview. But if you're writing a column for Rupert Murdoch, these little details don't matter. These facts don't matter. It's all about the feelings, trying to portray one of the rare voices of balance in the British media as somehow being bent by lying in a column in a newspaper. It's plus ça change. So then you have this problem here that I suffer from is thinking, well, it must matter more than I think it does. It must matter more than it seems to. And to play into that position, you would, I think, point at the winter fuel payments, wouldn't you? You'd say, well, how can they possibly have been taking largesse from Wahid Ali while also cutting winter fuel payments? But if you think about even that for more than 90 seconds, you realise it's a false dichotomy. The figure attached to Keir Starmer's hospitality and clothing donations covers a 5-year period during which they weren't necessarily planning to cut winter fuel payments. That was a decision made having become party to the Office of Budget Responsibilities projections after winning the general election. So I did fall for that a bit. But then I thought to myself, well, if there's an old lady in Preston who's struggling to pay her gas bill, what possible role does the price of the spectacles that Keir Starmer has worn today have on her ability to pay her gas bill? So you can talk about the smell test, or you can talk about the optics. I hate that word, optics, by the way. It's become a sort of byword for woolly analysis. But in terms of what matters and what is substantive, it doesn't matter at all. Did it? It doesn't matter at all. How does your ability to pay your gas bill, how is it in any way affected by the price of the suit that Keir Starmer is wearing? Wahid Ali is a Labour peer giving money to his own party, giving money to members of his own party, people, I don't know, perhaps he even describes as friends. So what is it that I am supposed to be cross about? And then the other voice kicks in and goes, no, you must be missing something. And you begin to, well, am I being tribal? Am I being all the things that I accuse other people of being? And you can answer that question quite easily. Have they broken any rules? No. Have they broken any laws? No. Have they unlawfully prorogued Parliament? No. Have they lied to the House of Commons and been found to have done so by a committee of their own peers, with a majority of members belonging to their own party? No. Have they accepted donations and lied about it, as Boris Johnson did, arguably, with regard to his home decor? No. What transgressions are we describing here? And it would be foolish not to see them in the context of what went before. Because the people who are telling us to get angry, the people who are claiming to be angry, the people to whom I turn when I find myself thinking, does this actually matter more? They're precisely the same people who never mention the fact that Boris Johnson was bankrolled by the bloke who owns JCB, even as the bloke who owns JCB faces investigations into whether or not he owes £500 million in unpaid tax. Johnson took more money from Lord Bamford for his wedding to his current wife In one transaction, he took more money. If you divide the 5 years over which Keir Starmer is supposed to have been accepting the generosity of donors, if you divide it by 5, Johnson took more money in one deal with Lord Bamford to pay for his wedding, up to and including the glorified burger vans. The sum total of the Downing Street decoration was in excess, and that's one transaction with Lord Brownlow. The sum total of that transaction was more than the absolute total of 5 years' worth of donations received by Keir Starmer. So what am I supposed to be angry about? But then you must be missing something. You're suffering from your own footballification description. And you worry about that because the biggest difference between people in the centre or people on the extremes is that we actually like to judge ourselves by the standards we apply to other people. You look at a Johnson or a Trump or a Farage, they're constantly expecting to be let off while attacking other people for behaviour that they would never even question their own right to do themselves. So that's a great curse of the liberal, if you like, is applying this compass of self-regulation. Am I doing it? To which you return to the central question. You return to the central question of what have they done wrong? You see? What have they done wrong? What laws have been broken? What lies have been told? What standards have been breached? What regulations have been ridden roughshod over? And what transgressions have been committed? And I mean, it was yesterday evening, actually, I found myself thinking about this. And I suddenly thought, nothing at all. So some good journalists don't know what to do. Some good journalists are, trying to learn a new language, a language of honest, imperfect, flawed government. Having spent certainly the period between 2019 and 2022, having spent that period reporting upon profoundly dishonest, deliberately dissembling and deceitful government. And then the aberration of Liz Truss and the sadness of Rishi Sunak, you find yourself thinking, what do we do? What do we report on? There's this vacuum now. And into that vacuum have moved Angela Rayner's photographer, Keir Starmer's suits and football match attendance, and Bridget Phillipson's birthday party. In the great scheme of public malfeasance in recent years, these things barely merit a whisper. If you're being honest, if you're being objective, how can you possibly care more about Keir Starmer's spectacles than you do about Boris Johnson acting upon the instructions of his old mates at the Daily Telegraph, trying to get Owen Paterson off the hook for egregious breaches of parliamentary standards, 2 resignations of his own independent advisers on the ministerial code? It's actually extraordinary. And of course, the first thing that you have to do is recognise either the dishonesty or the disingenuousness of people claiming that pointing this out is akin to excusing Johnson's moral depravity or Liz Truss's epic incompetence or Theresa May's weakness. It might be a bit like that, actually. I guess it might be a little bit like excusing Theresa May's weakness. But the challenge now, and it's one that I really, really don't... I know, you're telling me stuff I already know. Everything that we're supposed to be getting angry about now has been declared. Johnson claimed he'd lost the phone and couldn't remember who'd paid for his flat to be redecorated to the tune of £112,500. I mean, who here, honestly, would remember that the identity of the person that had thrown you a 6-figure sum to tart up your flat? Of course you're going to forget it in a heartbeat. So there are 2 questions here. And Beatrice tells me Angela Rayner has not got a photographer. The department she is a head of has a ministry communications photographer, somebody be working essentially for the communications department. So what am I supposed to be angry about, except the fact that I expect Labour to be held to a higher standard than everybody else? I just do, because I'm naive and idealistic. And they are held to a higher standard than everybody else, because if they broke the law or breached the rules or rode roughshod over the regulations or spat all over the standards or lost their own ethics advisors in disgust at their own conduct, then you would come down on them even harder than you did on the lot before. So what am I supposed to be angry about or even concerned about at the moment? That's my first question for this week. 0345 6060 973. And remember, as soon as you tell me what I'm supposed to be angry about, I'll ask you to compare it to what went before, and on a scale of 1 to 10, if you like, tell me how loudly these supposed transgressions register. And then the second question I've got for you is, what are we going to do? I nearly said guys then. Slightly plaintive tone to my voice. What are we going to do, guys? You know, it was easy, our time together, when most of the media was lying to us about the people in power, and we knew it, and they were lying from a position of defence. I could just come on the radio every morning and point it out. You could ring me up and tell me what the situation was like if you were trying to help with the COVID response, but you didn't have any friends in the cabinet. You didn't have Michael Gove on speed dial. You didn't have a long history of donating to the Tory party. You didn't have access to the VIP lane. We could do it easily. But what do we do now? What do we do now? What I mean, you can talk to me about the public mood. Here's one. Yeah, Robert says, you have not read the public mood. Well, what the heck is the public mood, Robert? You can't answer the question of what they've done wrong. Oh, you haven't read the public mood, says Robert, who doesn't go into Idiot's Corner for that. Because what I've done, and it's probably my fault that you haven't noticed, what I've done is describe what has been done to provoke the public mood. The pretense, the epic lie, the obvious dishonesty that the people who haven't broken the rules, the people who haven't broken the law, the people who haven't trashed parliamentary standards, the people who haven't hemorrhaged their own ethics advisors, the people that haven't kept donations secret or left largesse undeclared, these people are somehow as bad or as deserving of my opprobrium as the people that did all of those things, Robert? So it's not even about comparisons with the last lot, and I can understand why you might desperately want to cling to the carcass of that idea. It's about, and here's the point, it's about the importance of a rules-based system. That's what's been broken over the last 8 years. The importance of a rules-based system, whether it's Trump or Johnson or any of their acolytes, the idea that the rules shouldn't apply to us, the idea that the rules don't matter, the idea that the rules are only for the little people. Something that was spotted about Johnson by his classics master at Eton College in that famous letter that I won't read to you again because you've heard it so many times before. The network of obligations that bind us all. The idea that these people are not bound by the network of obligations that bind us all. So forget about the identity of the people that came before. If your concern is, and as it should be, for the rules-based order, for the network of obligations that bind us all, for the standards, for the regulations, for the rules, these Labour politicians have done nothing wrong. Nothing at all wrong. And yet the people who sat idly by while the rules-based order was trashed, the people who in many ways indulged in cheerleading and tummy tickling while regulations were broken, standards were breached, laws were snapped, they are telling me to get cross about the people who've broken no rules. And I don't know how we do it journalistically. So I need your help. What am I supposed to be cross about? 0345 6060 973. And how do we plot a course through this absolute salad of rollicks that is being served up to us by the people who were either implicit in or silent while various iterations of the Tory party took this country to the abattoir?
James O'Brien on LBC.
24 minutes after 10, and one of the sort of thoughts I found myself nursing last night was that they need someone in Downing Street who kills this stuff stone dead early, who does what I've just done. Forgive me, that's a bit arrogant. A sort of Alistair Campbell figure who would be able to get in front of these ludicrous stories. The idea that Keir Starmer's glasses have any bearing whatsoever upon the ability of a pensioner in Preston to pay her electricity bill. But if it is the rules-based order that concerns us and that needs protecting, how have you allowed yourself to become angered or disappointed by people who haven't broken any rules? Tony is in Hampton Court, the site, Tony, of law-breaking and rule-breaking by the ruling class upon a scale that thankfully we will probably never have to endure again. But that was 500 or 600 years ago. What do you want to say about the current landscape?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what you say about the previous lot. I mean,
it's not. It's not that. It's not. I'm sorry. I'll let you speak in a minute. It's not them. It's what they did to rules, and we're talking about the primacy and the importance of rules, not the identity of individuals. So it's all about the rules.
Yes, and I do get. I'm not annoyed or irritated with. Labour for breaking the rules, because I think it's pretty clear that they haven't broken any rules. But there is a kind of, I mean, you mentioned optics earlier, and there is a. Yeah, I know.
But I'm going to say, because I'm never going to get the word out of the vocabulary. Every time I say it or you say it, I'm just going to say I hate that word. But it's an important word. What it does is describe, it describes perceptions that are not necessarily fact-based. And the invention of the word optics in this context is designed to create the idea that the facts don't really matter. The optics do. And that's bad, man.
Well, to some extent, I think to some extent what it looks like does matter, and that's kind of quite ironic, bearing in mind a lot of this is to do with clothes and things, because there's a whole other argument about whether it affects somebody's state of mind or whatever, depending on what they're wearing and how they yes. turned out. But the reason I'm irritated so much is because this was certainly the clothes thing was such an easy thing to not to do. Whatever the rules say about accepting gifts from people and whatever, and you're within it, and you've declared it properly. Whatever those rules say, you can still say no, thank you.
I agree with you. And that's why I like the word. Yeah, but irritation is a fine word. Irritation is not what is being provoked by the people that were cheerleading for Boris Johnson. This isn't irritation. This is this is hatred. This is the cultivation of genuine bile for people who haven't broken any rules. So you're coming from the point of view of a critical friend. And critical friends are incredibly useful. I remember when Alistair Campbell said if he was still in Downing Street, he wouldn't let anyone go on Twitter, which might have been a little bit of overreach, a little bit overambitious, but you have a similar rule in place where you say just don't take clothes from... Well, except for the fact that he's not looking for commercial preferment. He's a Labour Party peer who happens to be considerably richer than Yao, and he's spreading the money around a bit to his mates who can't afford fancy schmutter.
Yeah, and do you know, James, if Keir Starmer had been, a middle-ranking civil servant who'd suddenly just gone for a career in politics, and after 3 years as an MP, had become the leader of the Labour Party, If he needed a makeover, I think you're saying, if he needed a breakfast television style makeover, and he didn't have the cash to pay for it. I don't know about needing a makeover. I actually think Keir Starmer did need a makeover, but I think by today's standards. But I think exactly. But I think if Keir Starmer needed a makeover, then Keir Starmer is clearly somebody who ought to be in a position to have paid for it. Obviously, I don't know all the ins and outs.
We are going. I think we're going to circle this point a lot this hour. We acknowledge two things at the same time. He has done absolutely nothing wrong by any objective measure of rules, standards, ethics, or regulations, or even laws, and yet we're disappointed in him for not seeing this cavalcade, this avalanche of ordure that's been poured over his head by people who aren't honest. He should have seen it coming, is what we're saying, and that's going back 5 years. And we knew about.
He needs some new glasses.
Perhaps he should have gone to the Specsavers. Well played, Tony. And that's the problem, and that's what I mean about the distorting lenses. I hope that you share my conniptions about this, because it's obviously a professional concern, not just a personal one. But if every view you have of a story is through a distorting lens, whether it's the obvious lies of the Sun today, or the ludicrous exaggerations of the Telegraph, or the embellishments of some broadcasters who were tickling Boris Johnson's toes until long after he'd left Downing Street in absolute disgrace. And they're telling us to get cross about the glasses, and I can't help myself thinking maybe I should be crosser. I think last week I did overcompensate. I kind of found some crossness somewhere Whereas with the benefit of the weekend to think about things, what am I supposed to be cross about? They should have known what all the dirty liars in the media would do with a story like this, and therefore they shouldn't have done it. Well, that's government by dirty liars. That's government by corrupt journalists. That's government by Tory shills. Oh, we shouldn't have done this thing even though it's not wrong because the Tory shills will pretend that it's terrible. Is that what you want from a Prime Minister? What have you done? Absolutely nothing wrong, but I regret it deeply and I won't do it again because the right-wing media have managed to turn it into a huge bonfire. That's the country that we live in. The bonfire never stops burning. But what am I supposed to be cross about? Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:34 and it is a challenge for the rare corners of mainstream media or legacy media or whatever you want to call it to plot the new course, to report upon the new reality, especially when almost every other voice in the space is pretending that Labour politicians have done something egregious. Listen, you can hold two thoughts in your head at the same time. I thought Tony in Hampton Court made that point really well, or proved that point really powerfully. Oh man, why have you allowed yourself to be open to such obvious lines of attack? You silly old sausage. And also, for goodness sake, for the people that sat idly by while Boris Johnson and his mates set fire to everything that we hold dear in this country, from the actual sovereignty of Parliament, from the scrutinising role that Parliament plays, right up to sending Jacob Rees-Mogg to Balmoral to mislead the late Queen. If you were cool with that, the idea that you're cross about Keir Starmer's undercrackers is patently and objectively ridiculous. I don't believe that his undercrackers were paid for by his colleague in the Parliamentary Labour Party, Wahid Ali, a man who has obviously ended up with, and these are my favourite kind of tycoons, more money than they know what to do with. So, anyway, what are we supposed to be cross about, rather than, if you like, disappointed that you've allowed yourself to be vulnerable to such lazy and dishonest attacks? And then the other voice kicks in and says, hang on a minute, why are you letting the lazy and dishonest attacks lead the coverage? Why are you letting that ugly, corrupt tail wag the... I don't know. Roy's in Bristol. Roy, what do you want to say?
Yes, good morning, James.
Hello, Roy.
I should say, first of all, I'm a Labour Party member, have been most of my life. I'm in my 70s now, voted for Keir Starmer to be leader, campaigned in the last election. I thought I'd better set that out first of all.
Good.
Couple of points to make,
yes.
And I'm going to pick up on what you've just been saying, actually. What really gets me is this is something that's been brought to attention by the right-wing media, as you correctly point out. But what makes me so cross is that mainstream media, and I have to really cite the BBC here,
yes.
make it a big story. They pick it up and run with it and run with it.
Yes.
That's what leads to people getting angry. If it were just left on the front page of the Daily Mail and the Telegraph, it would only get to a narrow audience that are bound to have a go. So that's my first point.
Well, let me pause you there, because you distill to its very essence the problem that I'm trying to articulate, because I don't have particular beef with what the BBC have done, in the sense that they are looking at it through the distorting lenses that I've been describing all morning. Exactly. And they're thinking to themselves, well, maybe this is a bigger deal than our news sense tells us it is. And also, if the Daily Mail and the Telegraph and the usual tummy ticklers in broadcast media are screaming about it from the rooftops, if we don't treat it like the second coming of Beelzebub, they'll accuse us of being biased, and they'll accuse us of being propagandists, and they'll accuse us of taking our eye off the ball, even though you could sit here until the end of the universe and not have anything on the Labour side of media being anywhere near as corrupt as what we've seen for the last 8 years on the Tory side. Yes. So I've got a little more sympathy for them than you have, in a way.
Well, I think you have, actually, to be honest. I mean, it's like on the Today programme,
yes,
when they cover the newspapers, and they will cover the Daily Mail in the same way as they cover everything, but often they just leave it there, the story. That's it.
Yes.
The second point I wanted to make is a bit more critical of Keir, but only in the way the last caller was. When I heard this, I felt overall, what a load of nonsense. Of course, there's no problem with the Arsenal tickets, and I don't have a problem with the clothes particularly, but I'll tell you one thing that really did stick in my throat, James, surprisingly. The spectacles
costing over £2,000. Eyewear glasses, I've got very nice designer glasses. I've got 2 pairs at Specsavers, got to advertise.
Yes, no, fair enough.
For 400 quid. And what I felt was, Gil, what on earth are you doing buying such expensive glasses? Because the optics, word you don't like, the optics
hate that word.
are terrible. Terrible. It's the sort of thing you'd expect Rishi Sunak to do, to go and blow over £2,000 on a pair of glasses. I wouldn't expect that.
Are we confident, Roy, that that figure was for one pair of spectacles?
Well, that's what your producer asked me, and I said, look, I have to confess, it's presented that way.
Well, I think we might have actually knitted your 2 points together in rather spectacular fashion here. Because to the best of my knowledge, what was registered was luxury eyewear, which translates as multiple pairs of designer glasses, possibly all of which cost no more than your treasured.
Right. No, that's a really, really good point. Actually, it'd be really helpful to know the answer on that.
I think we do. I mean, I mean, definitely luxury eyewear is the phrase used, and all the coverage I've managed to hastily consult while you were speaking looks at the conclusion that it is multiple pairs of designer glasses over 5 years. So that works out at £2,500 over 5 years, works out at about 500 quid a year, there or thereabouts, the same sum that you spent in Specsavers.
Well, I think, there we go. It does prove the point I was making first. It really does.
It does, yeah.
Because that's what I've heard. And I listen to you a lot. I read papers. I'm very engaged in politics, and that had passed me by, James.
Because we thought he's walking around in something that Dame Edna Everidge might have considered to be a suitable adornment for her fizzog. Some emerald-studded spectacles that the rest of us could only gawp at. I think that and again, it's interesting how far you have to dig back into this. I think, actually, Roy, stay there. I think the most expensive pair so far identified from a manufacturer called Garrett Late Hampton came in at a stonking £240.
Bloody hell, excuse my language. What?
So 10 pairs.
You've done a good job making this clear to everyone.
Well, if only everyone was listening, Roy. But it is a beautiful illustration in the space of one phone call with one fully paid up Keir Starmer supporting Labour member of how it all works. I'll tell you what sticks in my craw, James, the fact that he's walking around in spectacles that cost £2,500. And he's right, that's stupid. Except he's not. He's walking around in spectacles that cost 240 quid. And he's got 10 pairs of them. And I envy that bit, because I lose spectacles like it's going out of fashion. In fact, I went through a phase of wearing them on a chain around my neck, but I decided that the Larry Grayson look was still a little bit premature for me. Roy, what a charming call. Thank you so much. Jester is in Preston. Jester, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Can you hear me clearly?
Loud and clear, Jester. What's on your mind?
Yes, well, what it is, you wanted to know what really annoys me about this is the the rich, very wealthy right-wing media seem to have such a control and influence over what information is put out.
I think that
a lot of people,
we just proved that in the space of the last phone call, didn't we? Is that we all labour under the illusion that some things have gone on that haven't actually gone on. So nail down what it is that we could be irritated or angered by.
I know exactly. I myself don't I like to use my own brain. My granddaughter, that's one of the things she has said to me, Grandad, use your own brain. And that's what I do now. They're playing on people's fears, genuine fears and anxieties. And that's what annoys me about and I'm annoyed about the right-wing media. But I'm also disappointed, really, in Labour that perhaps he should have seen this coming. They know what the right-wing media are like, and surely they're not their strategy. It's just...
What do you think they're going to do with the news that you've had £2,500 worth of spectacles? To which you reply by saying, well, it's the varifocal super-thin lenses that cost all the money. The frames themselves are quite reasonably priced. Or you respond by saying they're not going to mind about someone buying me a suit, and yet I think if you were there in that room, and if I was there, in that room, I think we'd have said, no, this is just going to land really, really badly. You can't take 30 grand's worth of clobber from a tycoon, from a millionaire, when people perceive you, rightly or wrongly, as being wealthy and very well paid.
I know, and also, James, me myself, about 2 years ago, my health suddenly dipped.
I'm sorry.
And what I'm concerned about is the state of the healthcare system. It took over far too long to be diagnosed, and consequently my body was damaged before I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis and got the medication. So I'm sure that Labour will sort the National Health Service out. I know, because they do really care. I feel that. And that is my concern, that if they're made to fail because of this awful right-wing media, then this is what put me in this position in the first place, because the Tories have made such a mess of the healthcare system. And
that has economic impacts all day long, as we know, with people who would like to be working and can't. In fact, we talked last week about the combination of long-term illness, specifically long COVID, and the fact that our health system was in such a mess when the pandemic hit, that the pauses and the delays that you describe render people who want to work unable to work, which has an economic impact, never mind a kind of mental health impact and physical health impact upon the people suffering. 10:45 is the time. And he mentions money being spent. Rachel Reeves will announce today that she has ordered investigations into more than £600 million worth of COVID contracts that were awarded under the Conservatives. That's your money. That's my money. That's our money. You'll remember that PPE Medro, which was the company linked to the Conservative peer Michelle Mone, that was awarded contracts worth £200 million. It's still the subject of an investigation by the National Crime Agency. But what would you rather? Would you rather have a government giving money to very, very rich people, or very, very rich people giving glasses to the government? Go on, take your pick. It's 10:46.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:48 is the time. I'm beginning to think that perhaps things haven't changed as much as I thought they would have done. I mean, if you are kind enough to come here as in search of a corrective to the forces of deceit, dishonesty, illegality even, that have crippled this country in recent years. Everyone agrees that Britain is broken now. It's funny, when I started writing how they broke Britain, I wondered whether or not that was a little bit pessimistic, but they literally all agree about it now. Even the Conservative Party leadership contenders, who probably bear more responsibility than almost anybody else. Well, Farage is using the phrase as well, despite, of course, being one of the key architects of our national decline by unleashing the forces of Brexit and nativist ignorance. So everyone agrees that it's broken. And yet the people who were essentially cheerleading the process of breaking have now turned their fire on the Labour Party. So it's the same people telling lies about different people. The balance hasn't really changed. So you tune into me every day and I'll tell you the truth. If Keir Starmer breaches ministerial codes, I apologise in advance for the fact that I'll be considerably angrier than I was when Boris Johnson did, because I expect much more from Keir Starmer. To be fair, I expect much more from an incontinent feral cat than I expect from Boris Johnson. But if Keir Starmer breaches the ministerial code, if Keir Starmer unlawfully prorogues Parliament, I'll be bloody livid and I'll feel personally betrayed. But until he starts doing some of the things that stand comparison with his predecessors, or until he starts trashing the rules, breaking the laws, transgressing regulations, ripping up standards, then you'll forgive me for wondering what the hell everybody else is banging on about. And then we're back to where we have been for the last 8 years. We're back to being the people in the business of pointing out that the emperor is naked. It's just that in this case, it's the people telling the story that are the emperor, as opposed to the people that the story is about. So I think we're going to be okay. Patricia is in South Lanarkshire. Patricia, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. This won't take long. I can't believe I'm on speaking to you about this morning.
You definitely are.
I've had steam coming out of my ears for days now, and I just had to say I am heartily sick and tired of listening to the same old, every hour of every day recently about Keir Starmer and what's been spent and all the rest of it. I'm quite sure the gentleman that was on 2 calls previously, I agree with most of what he had to say, and I'm sure that there must be many, many people out there who feel the same as I do. Just let it die off, and as my son would say, let it lie.
Just let it lie. You wouldn't let it lie.
It's such a big yawn.
Well, the caller you referred to made that brilliant point about us thinking that we're quite clear-eyed critics. Yes. We're quite watching the story quite closely. We're quite clued up, and yet you can come away with the idea that he's walking around in spectacles that Edna Everage would wear 2.5 grand's worth of spectacles on his face, and it's just not true. Paul's in Northolt. He says, I've been a spectacle sales rep for over 30 years. It's perfectly reasonable and indeed very common for a pair of spectacles to cost £250 upwards, plus another £500 for decent lenses. Talk about a storm in a teacup. But what do we do, Patricia? Do we ignore the teacup, or do we point out the idiocy of the rest of the coverage?
From my point of view, it's all just too silly, and someone somewhere in the media is churning this up every hour of every day, on and on and on, where there are much more important things to talk about. So he's got some new suits and he's got new glasses. Let it go.
And you can also say you probably shouldn't have done that, or even that you definitely shouldn't have done that, except that lets the tail wag the dog. It lets the tail of the dishonest journalists, dishonest journalism wag the dog of the government's behaviour. But when it comes to the contents of his wardrobe or the contents of his spectacle cases, I can live with that. It's if they're second-guessing policy, if they're changing policies because they're frightened of right-wing media, if they're changing their wardrobe, if they're because of, dreadful word, I hate it, optics, then I could just about live with it. So, well, I could definitely live with it because it avoids this sort of nonsense. Problem is, something would spring up immediately to replace it. So that there is the bottom line. What rules have been broken? Because you can talk about they're all as bad as each other, then you have to provide the examples of laws being broken, rules being broken, standards being breached, colleagues combining to rip up the rule book after you've been found to have broken it, phones going missing, donations not being declared. You need to find me all the evidence of this if you're going to claim that they're all as bad as each other. Otherwise, I'm afraid it is Idiot's Corner for you. Thank you, Patricia. Toby's in Queen's Park. Toby, what would you like to say?
Well, you're asking, I think, who or what you should be angry with. Yeah. And the answer is you. Because you are the person
always angry with me.
Well, you should be.
It's a Catholic. It's a consequence of Catholicism, Toby.
Well, I won't go into that now. Because you are focusing on this issue again this morning. Yeah. You are doing their job for them.
I'm not, though.
Why are you doing it?
I'm not, though.
Why have you
I'm not, though. I've
it?
constructed a battleship of unanimity that this is not a story. So I'm pushing back against the tidal waves of ordure that are washing over the public otherwise.
I understand all that, but nevertheless, I can assure you that the people in the Labour Party today are looking at this, listening to this programme and thinking, why doesn't he shut up? Why doesn't he concentrate on something else? I think
most people think that most of the time. I'm going to argue with you.
No, but you understand what I'm saying.
Well, I do, but I also understand that you're wrong. So you heard a fully paid-up member of the Labour Party of several decades standing who voted for Keir Starmer to be leader. You heard us together, live on air, work out that even he...
Yes, I know,
even he had been manipulated and misled. So when people are being manipulated and misled, Toby, my job is to cure them.
Well, you're still focusing on the issue, but can I just make another point?
Do you know what you're like? You're like a doctor. You're like someone telling a doctor that by talking about the disease, he's actually giving the disease oxygen and helping the disease to spread.
No, I'm not doing that.
You are exactly doing that.
No, I'm sorry. That's
a brilliant analogy. And the reason why you hate it is because it slaps so hard.
No, it's not a good analogy.
It's a brilliant analogy.
Make another point that I was going to make.
Yes, of course you can.
And it's this. In 1938, the Prime Minister was paid £10,000 a year and £1,000 as an MP. That's the equivalent today, I think, of about £535,000. If we want our politicians to be squeaky clean, we need to pay them proper salaries. And £167,000 a year, of which, by the way, half, I think a little more than half, I'm not quite sure which way it works, is actually his MP salary. Yes.
So the bonus for being PM is close to negligible.
It's an absurdly low amount.
Well, speaking as someone who couldn't afford to live in Queen's Park and so was forced to move further west, having had my first child on the fringes of where you live, I understand how you're saying that. But selling it to people who are worrying about paying
I understand that. But
I know you understand that.
This
is what I'm doing, Toby. I'm setting the record straight, which is what you rang in to object to. If the record is bent, you cannot argue that the business of setting it straight is a bad thing to do. You just can't.
Argue because,
you can't.
Okay. Because what I think you're doing, the point is, when you said to make a decision as to what you're going to discuss, you do not decide to discuss today.
No, I said, how do we discuss this? I didn't say, what do we discuss? I said, how do we walk the tightrope between media lies?
You choose what you to put in to make the subject of your program.
Yes.
And you are focusing attention on.
Imagine, if you will.
We disagree about this.
No, we can't disagree. I'm not going to let you go until you agree with me. You know how this show works. So I'm going to give you another analogy now, Toby. I'm going to give you an analogy of a forest fire.
A forest fire, yes.
And at what point does it become a case of all hands to the pump? At what point should we all, even though we'd much rather be talking about the importance of building a new hospital 50 miles away, or the essential nature of inquiries into £600 million worth of potentially dodgy COVID contracts, that fire is raging, and at some point I'm going to have to drag my hose over there, Toby.
Okay, I'll give the answer to that.
Go on then.
If this were a forest fire, I would agree with you, but it isn't. This is just part and parcel of, this is just tomorrow's fish and chips, and there will be many more instances where of stuff that will come and go. There are huge issues out there in the world.
And it's not either or, is it? I mean, I've chosen to talk about this today because
honestly,
it is dominating.
The biggest single issue that we face today, in my view, is nothing to do with the Labour Party or even to do with this country. It's the election in America. That is the thing.
And talking about Keir Starmer's glasses doesn't prevent me from talking about the election in America, which I have done, will do, and will continue to do until the blessed thing actually happens. But I take your criticism. I mean, in a way, you're the voice in my head, Toby. During my introduction this morning, should we even be talking about it? Do we add oxygen to the nonsense? But I'm confident, particularly after that fascinating exchange about the cost of the spectacles. I'm confident that the record needs setting straight, and that's what we've been doing, not for the entire 20 years that I've been on air, but certainly for the last 10, 11, 12 years, setting the record straight when the record is still written by dishonest actors and by bad players, by fibbers, by shills, by client journalists, and by blatant liars, as is evinced by Harry Cole's column in The Sun today, telling blatant lies about Lewis Goodall, one of the tiny number of voices that are actually capable of criticising all sides on the political spectrum. But the job today was to set the record straight, and thanks to you and all my other callers, I think we have. I agree with you about Prime Minister's salaries, for the record, but goodness me, getting that over the line would be, well, that would be a Herculean task, I think, up there with the Augean stables.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 3 minutes after 11. This is nice from John, and I hope our friend in Queen's Park is still listening, Toby. James, you are the fire brigade, and this is a forest fire. Thank you. I feel seen. Finally seen. Here's a story. I do like this. What stories are your favourites? The ones where you're 100% certain what you think, and then after we've talked about it for an hour, you're 110% certain what you think, and it hasn't, and it is what you thought at the beginning of the conversation. Or do you like the ones where you wobble a bit? We used to call them pendulums, didn't we? Where you can feel your pendulum swinging during the course of the conversation. I've already felt my pendulum swing this morning with regard to the story that we're about to talk about next. It's a story of a 14-year-old boy caught up in the Farage riots, who was so sternly told off by his parents that police and prosecutors decided to take no further action. And my first thought, and at the moment I could easily swing back to the position I started in, but my first thought was that this was ridiculous. For example, how can this 14-year-old boy not face the full force of the law when another 14-year-old boy who is not lucky enough to have committed and caring parents is going to get his collar felt, is going to have his record stained, is going to be is going to become familiar to the criminal justice system, is going to have convictions on his record. So just pause and think about that before I give you more detail. There's two other boys that I'm thinking of. There's the 12-year-old boy whose mother chose to fly to Ibiza for a holiday the day before he was due in court. She ended up getting ordered to pay £1,200 in compensation, and she ended up getting ordered to go on a parenting course. But crucially, the boy was given a 12-month referral order after admitting violent disorder. So there are two boys here, a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old. They could conceivably be 366 days apart, couldn't they? Or 367 days apart. One of them has got a 12-month referral order for violent disorder, and one of them has walked away unscathed by the criminal justice system. Can you see where I'm going with this? So the boy whose mother was so negligent and delinquent that she flew to Ibiza when her boy was due in court has been punished by the system. Whereas the boy whose chances of staying on the straight and narrow due to responsible and conscientious parents has not been punished at all by the criminal justice system. I'm going to open up the phone lines now, but I haven't finished my introduction, so I think you might change your mind. Because that right now sounds unfair, yeah? That's like he's been punished twice. He's got a potentially rubbish mum, although I'm sure she loves him and all the rest of it. And now he's got a criminal record as well. And let us, for the sake of argument, presume that the behaviour on the day is comparable, that the behaviour on the day is in some sense similar. The other story this reminded me of was the case of the father and son who were both jailed over the riot at the Rotherham Hotel, where police officers were attacked. Asylum keepers and hotel workers feared for their lives as the mob outside tried to set the building on fire. Some of them, of course, if not all of them, responding to disinformation and blatant lies spread on social media. And the father and son are behind bars. Now, the son obviously is older than the two boys that we're talking about in this hour, but only by 4 years. So this boy, Kenzie, roughly, is 18 years old. And he's gone to jail for his part in the riot. So he, I would argue, at risk of sounding a little bit touchy-feely, he has been punished twice. He has an inadequate father. He has a father who has led him into this sort of criminality. I find it impossible to believe that it is a coincidence they turned up at the same riot with the same behaviours. So he never had a chance, that kid. If he was 12 and his dad had taken him to the riot, would you feel sorry for him? I think you would. Maybe you wouldn't. Remember, the only person under the age of criminal responsibility who is absolutely 110% to blame for absolutely everything that had happened to them, including being trafficked by terrorists, is Shamima Begum. But generally speaking, we recognise that young people are not as responsible for their actions as older people. Look, for good or for ill, there'll be some older people who are not responsible for their actions, much more easily led than others, for example, or some people who just are incapable of processing the consequences of their own actions. We've all had mates like that over the years, that the one that you can't quite believe he's gone there, or you can't quite believe the thing that he's done. But generally speaking, as a society, we acknowledge and accept that young people are not as responsible for their actions as older people. The sad thing is, in a way, that on your 18th birthday, regardless of your personal development, your background, your character, your parenting, or your experiences, that's it. All bets are off. You're as responsible as you would be if you were 40 or 50, generally speaking. So he's been punished twice, right? He's got a thug father, and he has descended into thuggishness. and the courts decided to send him to jail. And now I take you back to the 12-year-old, who now has a criminal record after admitting violent disorder. He already has a mother so uncommitted to his care that she swanned off to Ibiza in full knowledge that he had a court appearance scheduled. So I'm not sure he ever had a chance. I know this can be a little bit naive, and I know that if I had feral 12-year-olds outside my front door every night setting fire to things and causing all manner and intimidating my family, I'd be a lot less sympathetic to elements of this story than I currently sound. But, you know, we most of us who've lived in cities for a long period of time have at various times or another had to deal with antisocial behaviour on your doorstep, and for someone to turn around and say, oh, he's only 14, it doesn't cut much mustard, does it? It doesn't butter many parts. Oh, he's only 14. But it is a principle upon which our criminal justice system rests. This 12-year-old boy never had a chance. He has been punished by the nature of the parenting he has received. The same, I would say, is true of the 18-year-old currently in jail for attending a riot with his thug father. So a delinquent mother and a thug father have children who feel the full force of the criminal justice system. And then I bring you back to the 14-year-old who was marched to the station by his parents as soon as they found out where he'd been. And, I miss my dad all the time, some days more than others. But that is a mode of parenting that will have clicked with so many people. Usually it's nicking stuff, isn't it? Usually it's like you get home from the newsagents and your dad's been buying a paper and he notices, because you've tried to hide it but you're not very good at it, and he notices you've got a cream egg in your pocket. Probably the worst thing to pinch, actually, when you think about it, in terms of the silhouette that it would create in your trousers. But you've got a cream egg in your pocket. And where did you get that cream egg from? Grandma gave it to me. So your grandma lives in Sheffield? No, she didn't. Where did you get that cream egg from? Did you steal it from the shop? Right. And I don't know whether this actually happened to me. I'll check with Mum after the show. But I've got a feeling, and I'd be 6 or 7 years old. I've got a feeling he marched me back to the newsagents in the horse fair in Kidderminster and made me give it back to the shopkeeper and apologise. He didn't march me to Kidderminster police station, which I think in the circumstances would have been a little bit extreme. But how many parents have done that? How many parents have greeted their children's misbehaviour by siding with the rules? Do you know that's relevant to the last hour of the programme? It's why it's so important when you're being told that politicians are misbehaving and transgressing to establish precisely what rules they have broken. The return to the rules-based order. And those are your two types of parents, right there. The Boris Johnson parent and the Keir Starmer parent. The one who doesn't think the rules should apply to him and his, and the one who does, and therefore doesn't break them. What was your... I bet, well, who knows what your dad was like? Who knows what your mum was like? But the idea, it seems a little bit, I don't know, is it rarer now, do you think? I honestly don't know. Is it more likely or less likely now that a parent would march a child into the police station or back to the shop from which they'd nicked a Mars bar? I actually haven't got a clue, and I don't think we've got any way of measuring it. So, 14-year-old boy marched to the police station by his mother and father as soon as they learned of his part in the disorder. So I don't think he would have got caught had his mum and dad not presented him to the desk sergeant, to the custody officer in the local police station. And the judge, I beg your pardon, the director of public prosecutions has said there's no point prosecuting. Stephen Parkinson said the wrath visited on that child by his parents was more effective than anything the criminal justice system could deliver. And he talked about others where families regarded it as a day out. And I don't know who's right on this one. I think I could probably make a pretty powerful case for both positions. He shouldn't have got let off because his parents are responsible and law-abiding and concerned and committed. Because the kids whose parents are none of those things, well, the 18-year-old has gone to jail and the 12-year-old has got a violent disorder offence on his record forever. So what do you think? And what did your mum and dad do? What did they do? I mean, I don't want to say dob you in, because that turns it into the language of snitching, doesn't it? Or the language of grassing. But I'll tell you what the question I've got for you is. So you've got the theoretical inquiry into whether or not we think the DPP got this right. The anger of the mother and father who took their son to a police station after learning of his part in the disorder on social media. So maybe he would have been caught, actually. So scratch that from the record. They learnt on social media that he'd been there and his feet didn't touch the proverbial ground. Is this a good decision by the DPP? And if so, why? And if not, why not? 0345 6060 973. And then, what story from your own childhood did this make you remember? 0345 6060 973, where possibly you wouldn't have been caught if it wasn't for your own parents deciding that you needed to be punished. And the horror of being marched back into the shop to say sorry is probably greater. Oh, I don't know. That's why it's a phone in. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 18 minutes after 11 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. What is the purpose of the justice system? Is it punitive or rehabilitative? I put my teeth in before I say that word again. It's up there with quantitativizing, isn't it? Rehabilitative. Well, it's got to be both a bit, hasn't it? And Timothy and Alison make similar but different points. Timothy says, what class background did the 14-year-old come from? I bet it was middle. I bet you're right, actually. Well, do I? I don't know. And Alison says, I very much doubt that a black child would have been given the same grace. Well, we don't actually know the ethnicity of the child concerned, but given what we do know about institutional racism in the police, which is another story in the news today, I do understand exactly where you are coming from. So, is it fair that the 14-year-old whose parents are furious gets off scot-free, and the 12-year-old whose mother didn't care enough to attend court and swanned off to Ibiza instead gets a criminal record? Chris is in Chelmsford. Chris, what do you think?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I mean, at the highest level, I mean, that this lack of, the risk of a bad outcome for kids at bad parenting is inherent across the entire place. But right now, specifically, it is this point about what is the point of prison to an extent. Child A and child B, let's say they did exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
They're found guilty of exactly the same thing. The next step then is, if it's punitive, then is that really what prison is supposed to be? If it's about mitigating the chance of reoffending, child A, there is no mitigation because of the bad parenting, whereas child B, there is a chance of mitigation given the actions of the parents. Now, you could argue, well, they had the same parents and the child did it in the first place, but let's look at it more like there is a mitigating point, and then for one and the other. But then there is an inherent unfairness to child A, because it wasn't their choice of who their parents were. But
so what is your conclusion, Chris? So you've showed us your workings, but I don't know what popped out the bottom.
What it popped out is that if there is a prison that is able to be reforming
a sentence, because it's not prison. None of them are going to prison. It's a sentence. It's a referral order. And that means that rehabilitation can take place. So under that reading, you have to approve of this two-tier sentencing.
Do, because what I assume is at that point the state has to come in to do the work that the parent is not doing. And that's the purpose of the referral order, in theory. Now, whether it does that, I don't know.
No, this is you could be quoting the DPP. Sometimes the state has to intervene. A referral order would mean that rehabilitation can take place. That's the objective with youngsters, not to criminalise them. It's to put them on the right path. And the conclusion is the 14-year-old is on the right path. He's just fallen off it that night in Southport.
Yeah.
But the 12-year-old is categorically not on the right path, so it's the job of the state to intervene.
That's my view, James. I think that we need to just... It's about the kids, as it always should be. What is the best thing for these kids? And you have to, like you talk about, there's a cut-off point. It's not fair in some ways, but there has to be a point, and the judge has made a decision. Again, I would like to say that the judge is in the position to have the information to make the correct decision.
Well, clearly, I mean, it wasn't a judge. Again, I'm splitting hairs, but just for people just tuning in, no, the DPP made the decision before it even got to court. The police and prosecutors decided to take no further action, and the DPP has made the story public. The problem. Again, what do you say then? I guess we divide the population into two parts here, don't we? Is we divide the population into the one that I'm in, which is where the wrath of my parents would be the worst imaginable outcome for my own behaviour. I'd be more bothered, even when I got arrested, even when I got into trouble with the police, I was more fearful and more guilty about upsetting my parents and earning their disgust in some cases, and certainly their anger. I only got arrested twice. I don't want to make it sound like I was the Al Capone of Kidderminster. But that's one group of society. The other group of society have, through no fault of their own in many ways, ended up in a place where they couldn't give two hoots about upsetting their parents, because in the case, for example, of the woman who went to Ibiza, it would appear that the duty of care in the other direction wasn't there either.
This is really complex, because you can get quite puritanical about it, and I don't want to, because life is more grey than that.
Absolutely right.
I mean, so you mentioned class, social economic background will be the biggest differentiator between outcomes for children.
Yes.
The variance within those outcomes can be negatively and positively impacted by the parents, but within a spectrum where they're never going to come close to the police or that kind of thing, or into the benefits and others. I mean, whereas the variance for another is different. I mean, I think also with the lack of respect that seems to be creeping in terms of, you've talked about sort of where lack of respect for teachers seems to be coming in, and the demon of experts that started to happen. It's all feeding to the same sort of place. And
I guess what we need to do is take on board what the DPP has said, and although this is technically a punishment, a 12-month referral order after admitting violent disorder, if we see it as a rehabilitative sentence, a rehabilitative response, rather than as a puritanical or draconian consequence of his actions, then he is getting the help that he needs because he is less privileged than the child with the good parents, and therefore it makes sense. And I wonder, actually, thank you, Chris, you've really highlighted a point I'd overlooked, that is a problem society has. So that we have, partly as a consequence of the engines of disinformation we were talking about in the last hour, we've got this idea that rehabilitation is wrong. It goes hand in hand with tabloid lies about prisons being like holiday camps. The idea that if you commit a crime, then unless you are a candidate for the Reform Party, if you commit a crime, if, for example, you're sentenced for beating up a young woman, a young British woman, if you're a man of fighting age and you beat up a young British woman, you can still be a member of Parliament in the Reform Party. But usually on the right wing of media and politics, the idea is that you lock them up and throw away the key. That's one of the tropes that they like. And I wonder if that's another distorting lens that we all look through. So we forget the role of rehabilitation, and what we're thinking is one kid has got away with it and one is being punished, whereas actually one kid needed help and one kid didn't. So they gave it to the one that did. Still feels wrong, though. Still sits uncomfortably for me. Chris, thank you. Andrew's in Crawley. Andrew, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. It's incredibly complex.
It is.
Complex, this. It's very, very complex. But there's always been, where the justice system has to have a bit more with youngsters, a bit more carrot than stick. And if you've got a strong, judges will always respond to and have more in common with someone who's a firm but fair father and a strong moral compass rather than someone who really hasn't. And that's just kind of the way it is.
Yeah.
And there's a thing to you've got to keep yourself out of the system or out of prison if you've got a reason to be a good member of society. If you've got a strong family, a decent job, you're going somewhere as a youngster, you're in training, you've got a future, and you've just a blip. It's a mistake, like you say. You've been nicked a couple of times. I got nicked. And I could have gone to. I don't
know why. There's something about the way you talk and the way I talk, right?
Yeah.
I could never get away with saying I got nicked.
You know what I mean?
I came to the attention of authorities on a couple of occasions, Andrew.
I was 26. I was old enough to know better. I'm sure you were probably the same. You know what I mean?
No, I was young. I was a lot younger than that, but I was still old enough. I was still old enough to know better, actually.
But my parents were. I've had a very, very, very good life, but they didn't come to any of my sentencing. They sort of threw yourself at the mercy of that. But I did. I was godfather to lots of women's kids. I had lots of female friends. There's always that making a bad situation better. It's not an excuse, it's mitigation, but you will get a more favourable if you've got a reason to stay
when my mates...
I
mean, actually, you're just reminding us of the reality of the situation. When my friends from school ended up in court after the sort of drug scandal that got us all expelled, it was only cannabis, they...
There's an excuse already, mate, one up your sleeve already.
Well, it didn't matter then. In 1990, it didn't matter. Just for the benefit of younger listeners, you could end up in court and on the news if you went to a school like mine and there was a cannabis bust. They presented character references from the Cardinal Archbishop of Westminster, and they don't do that for no reason, do they? They do that because that kind of thing sways the judge.
Yes, it does sway the judge, but it shows that if you've got some sort of grounding, and like the judges will always have a more, something they've got more in common with. They don't want anyone to sort of police their own, but there's so many people that have got fathers that really couldn't give a monkeys, and they see the same faces sort of trotting through. It gets really tedious with them. So they're trying to throw a bit more carrot. I get that. I mean, maybe in the scales of justice, other people are going to say that's sort of unfair, but maybe that's a lesson to some of the ones that have fallen off the life's rails of it, and try and get a bit more.
And that's why the rest of us need to pay more attention to the sentencing notes and the sentencing comments, and in this case, where there was no sentence, to the explanation of the DPP that a referral order means rehabilitation can take place. So the 12-year-old gets help, hopefully gets help, albeit in a filleted post-austerity system. He gets more help than he would have done if the case had never come to court, or if the police had decided not to prosecute. A 12-year-old who is engaging in violent disorder with a mother who doesn't consider it to be an important enough experience for her to cancel her holiday to Ibiza and attend court with him needs something more than a slap on the wrist or a sentence. So I see the words referral order after admitting violent disorder, and I think punishment, whereas what the DPP is explaining is actually it's a recognition of need and a prescription of help or rehabilitation. It's coming up to 11:30. And remember, the other element of this conversation is helping people who perhaps don't understand why the anger of the parents would be worse. So why is that? Why is that? So I got arrested for shoplifting when I was 15. And I knew I wasn't going to go to jail. I was fairly confident I wasn't going to go to Borstal. But I had a very real risk of having a criminal record. Woolworths in Kidderminster, for reasons I've never understood, decided to keep the vinyl in the sleeves on display in the shop, which was a temptation I couldn't resist. Not an excuse, just an explanation. Hand on heart, I was much more frightened of Mum and Dad's reaction than I was of ending up in court. I think I was. Yeah, I was. So how do you explain that to somebody who has never had that level of parental intervention or has never had that kind of relationship with their parents? 0345 6060 973. And remember, I'm also interested in the experience from your childhood that this story reminds you of. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 11 is the time. Timothy writes, there's a fear of disappointing our parents, that look of disappointment on their faces when the police bring you home for shoplifting, with no action to be taken but a ban from the relevant shop. Timothy claims he's speaking for a friend. Yeah, right. I mean, I'm a little bit disappointed in you, to be honest, in that this is an opportunity perhaps for me to wheel out one of my 11 timeless anecdotes from my own life that I have used since 2014. 2004 even. I've used since 2004 to illustrate bigger issues, to illustrate stories in the news. So what would it be? I've mentioned the shoplifting, flirtation, and even the drugs bust. So they don't count as anecdotes. What's the anecdote? What's the anecdote for fully paid up members of the James O'Brien Listening Society? What's the anecdote now? If we're talking about effective and potentially unusual punishments inflicted by parents on children, up to the obviousness of marching them to the scene of the crime or marching the child to the police station and handing them over to the authorities. There's one that I haven't thought about for years. Punishment that my dad inflicted on my sister and me that was, I mean, I can tell you how effective it was. I still referenced it when I started doing this job. I still think about it now as it just worked. Whether it worked as a deterrent, there was certainly no rehabilitation involved, but goodness me, it made me think a lot more than any other punishments might have done. 11:35 is the time. So the 12-year-old with, we can say, slightly inadequate parenting. A couple of you pointing out the mum booked a holiday without even intending to take the 12-year-old with her. You don't know all of the details. I think the father is absent, so he gets to shirk all of his responsibilities. But generally speaking, for the comparison to work, 12-year-old gets a referral order. A 14-year-old whose parents spotted their son on social media getting stuck into the Farage riots and marched him straight to the police station. And he's got off essentially scot-free. 11:36 is the time. Phil's in Ealing. Phil, what made you pick up the phone?
Hello, James. Nice to see you. I've got to say, always great show you do, James. James, I teach in a pupil referral unit over in West London, and deal with some of the most hardcore kids in West London. Yeah. They've all been expelled from school for either behaviour to the teachers, drugs, alcohol abuse, or just like high-level behaviour which disrupts the rest of the classroom. And I think that we've had sometimes with parents actually come into the school if the kids are messing around. We have permission to call them, and they'll come down to our crew and they will go hellfire at their young person. And literally, sometimes it works, James. Sometimes the parents will come in actually into the classroom. The kids get so so red and so what is my mum and dad doing here? And literally, the kid's good as gold, James, for the next week or 2 weeks. And it's such a good deterrent. It's like, you keep messing around and showing this behaviour, we're going to call your parents in. Sometimes it works, James. Sometimes it doesn't.
Tell me about when it doesn't. Tell me about when it doesn't work.
When it doesn't work, it's not.
So some parents won't even respond to you. They won't even come, presumably.
Well, you know what? I think with our crew especially, we're part of a college, so obviously the kids get expelled. They come to us. They've got to do their GCSEs, like obviously every other kid in the country. But we do one-to-ones with them. So I do one-to-ones but they're aged to 14 to 16-year-olds.
Right.
And just trying to get them back on the track, James. Yeah. So many gangs and so many things like the social media aspect, and mostly for us the gangs. We've never seen it so bad, and this is West London. It's not even North London. Just the kids leaving the gangs and just the complete disarray, not even wanting to go into school. That's the hardest thing, actually, to get them in. Once they're in this world, it's kind of difficult to get them out. And once they've got that criminal record, or they get that kind of into the police system, it's hard, James. You know what? It's hard to get them back. But the success story is, but when you get them into doing something like a college course, or get them to do motor vehicles, hair and beauty, we've had a big intake of girls getting expelled.
Right.
Schools just don't want these kids anymore. They want their Ofsted excellent. They don't want these kids. They just send them all to a PRU, a local authority PRU, which is a really good idea. Hopefully this government will put a lot more money into these kind of places for these young people, because it's needed, James. I'm sorry, but
you don't have to apologise. Of course it's needed. It gives 12 to, that age group as well, that crucial age group, 14 to 16, where they could go in one of two directions for years to come, and people like you providing a guiding hand and getting them onto the right path. So I'm going to presume that you both understand and approve of the decision taken in this case, in these two cases, the referral order for the 12-year-old who is not clearly getting much guidance at home, and the slap on the wrist for the 14-year-old whose parents marched him into the police station.
Yeah, it's just parenting, James, I think, isn't it, sometimes? I think that them parents done completely the right job and like brought that young people straight to the police. It looks good. Like, who'd you learn rules from? I'm sure that, I got in trouble with the police when I was little, and my dad, I just didn't want to upset him. But I think all that kind of mentality's gone a little bit, like, you know what I mean? You've lost that, like, being scared of authoritative characters in your life. Now, to me, like, these young kids, they need, like, good, just role models, more of a such.
Yes. And if you haven't got, and yeah, you know, if you're thinking about that notion, because I'm struggling, I don't think you are. I'm struggling to keep rehabilitation in front of punishment. Because what the decision is based on is the conviction that the 14-year-old doesn't need rehabilitation and the 12-year-old does. But what it looks like, and what in the hands of irresponsible coverage it could look like, is that the one with the tough life got punished and the one with the nice life didn't. Yeah,
absolutely. I think it's a very difficult, with that it's kind of difficult like situation, but to me personally, I've been doing this job a long time, I think everyone deserves a second chance.
Everyone deserves a second chance, and some people don't need, they don't need one, because that first transgression will be the last one. Thank you, Phil, and thank you also for the work that you do. So quite a few of you have remembered, I'm delighted to say. Gary has remembered in a DM, quite a few others as well. Pat remembers, Roy remembers. So my sister and I were beating each other up in the back seat of the car on the way back from a long journey, and the deal was that we were going to stop for a Chinese meal. And unlike my children, who seem to have season tickets for Deliveroo, a takeaway or a meal in a restaurant when I was growing up was a sort of high days and family days, right? It was like almost an annual event. Mum and Dad would go out from here, but we never went with them. Going to the Burney Inn, any other people who grew up in Kidderminster will remember the riverboat. That to me was like Caesar's Palace. The Burney Inn on Blackwell Street in Kidderminster was the most glamorous place in the universe, as far as I was concerned. It had red velvet banquettes. Do you ever have a thought about something from your childhood and you really don't want to see the reality? I mean, it's not been there for years. I'd hate to see what it was actually like, because in my memory, it was like an ocean liner. In my memory, it was like something from a Hollywood film where you'd sort of expect synchronized swimmers to start appearing in the fountains in the foyer. Obviously, it can't have been anything like that. But it was such a treat to go to the Burney Inn and have a glass of orange juice as your starter. Young people don't know what I'm talking about. So your starter would be a glass of orange juice. It'd be on the menu, not on the drinks menu. You have a starter as a glass of orange juice. Your mum would have half a grapefruit. And then you'd have a steak. And it was like nothing else you'd ever tasted. And then you'd have Black Forest Gatto. If you got a little bit older, you might be allowed a prawn cocktail as your starter instead of the glass of orange juice. But you'd always have a Black Forest Gatto for afters, for pudding. So that anyway, we're coming back from this trip, and Dad has said, if you don't stop kicking each other. Did you do that when you both get on your back in the car, like foot to foot, and you're just kicking, like bicycle kicking each other constantly? And obviously, Mum and Dad, God bless his soul, had had enough of this, and I can't remember. I think they announced that if we didn't stop, then we wouldn't have Chinese food. And my sister and I kind of figured, well, yeah, as if, because you're going to stop for dinner. You're starving. You're not going to drive all the way back to Kidderminster and not have any food. So obviously we're going to get fed. So we didn't behave. We get to the Chinese restaurant and we're thinking, nice try. Yes, I'll be having sweet and sour king prawns. Thank you very much. We get in and pick up the menus. Now remember, this is a huge treat. And the waiter comes to take the order. And Mum and Dad order their delicious, succulent Chinese dinner. And then Dad says, and 2 plain omelettes and 2 glasses of water for the children, please. 2 plain omelettes. Don't at me to tell me when you were a kid you'd have been, plain omelette was beyond your wildest dreams. Had forks in the sugar bowl and tea bags on the washing line. I can't believe you had this is not the 4 Yorkshiremen. And that was a punishment that stayed with me forever, actually. Right now, I'm 52, and I was probably 10 when that happened. And it's still there. It wasn't particularly cruel, but it was unusual. And it worked. It just worked. It just landed. It got me. It completely got me. That punishment. A plain omelette. A plain old... God, blimey. It's coming up to 11:45. You can squeeze in yours. Well, the punishment... A friend of mine ran away while on holiday around the time of the Madeleine McCann disappearance. And as she tells the story, she was being bullied by her cousin. But, you know, I'm sure his side of the story would be slightly different. But Mum was absolutely beside herself, distraught. You would be missing for sort of 6-7 hours. Proper kind of alert the authorities. And then they find her. And she makes her write a letter and read it out to everybody. The letter of apology. She had to stand in front of all the families and friends that had been on the holiday together. And she had to read the letter out. I was like, that's a good part. I bet she didn't run away again. And I don't think that I ever ignored my dad again when he told me that if I didn't stop fighting, I wouldn't get any fancy scran. It is 11, and special prizes to anyone who picked up on the reference to succulent Chinese meal. 11:45 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:48 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Nice try, Keith. Not that Keith. Keith in Cornwall sent me the mythical name of a Chinese restaurant, which, if you were to read it out in a Black Country accent while claiming that it is a restaurant in the Black Country, would be very much an Ofcom offence waiting to happen. I was not born yesterday, Keith. Although we do keep tapes here of presenters on LBC from the mists of time who have fallen for texted in pranks. I'll give you the decent one. Toby Lerone would be the one you can say out loud, but some of them are filth, pure filth. And colleagues, past and present, who shall remain nameless, have occasionally fallen into these rather unpleasant traps. Talking of unpleasantness, I saw Andrew Neil opining at the weekend that never before has a government done so badly, so quickly as Keir Starmer's. And you thought, yeah, all right, mate. Check, please, from the Daily Mail. Well done. It's as if this woman had never happened.
2 years ago today, we launched the mini-budget to reverse Britain's economic decline and to get our country growing again. If the mini-budget hadn't been undermined by the economic establishment, things would be different now. The economy would be growing, people would be paying lower energy bills thanks to getting on with fracking. Corporations would want to locate in the UK because of our relatively low tax rates. The self-employed would be doing more business thanks to improvements in IR35. And we would see a more dynamic, go-getting economy. But that didn't happen because the mini-budget was undermined by the economic establishment.
That's today. Liz Truss today. Remember, Keir Starmer's glasses. Hurrah! Liz Truss, 2 years later, knowing that she exists in a media universe where she can claim that her epic disaster was somehow not her fault. It makes it a little odd that on the 17th of October in 2022, she apologised for the mistakes which had been made and wanted to accept responsibility. She said it's the mark of an honest politician to say, yes, I've made a mistake. So what is it then? Did she or didn't she? What she actually wrote, it was eco-zealots and trans activists in the civil service who had undermined her. And now it's the financial establishment. I don't think there is a topic there for us to have. I mean, what do you do? How do you achieve that level of delusion? Is that a thing? I don't think it is, but I thought I'd play it to you because, I didn't feel I should suffer alone. I thought you should have it inflicted upon you as well. The full version of it runs to about 3.5 minutes, and my mind still boggles. Jeremy is in Burgess Hill. Jeremy, what made you pick up the phone?
I don't quite know how to follow that, but
you'll be all right.
Anyway, no, great show, mate. Great topic. You mentioned omelette as a child.
Yeah.
Luxury.
Shut up. No, I'm not having. Yeah, go on.
No, I want to take you back. No, way back when I was just drinking a glass of pop and a packet of crisps in the pub car park. When I was 7. I found a £5 note, my brother and I, a long time ago. £5 then was a lot of money.
It was.
And we went to the local sweet shop and we bought some jelly babies or whatever you do then. And hid the change, went home, and felt, oh, great. The next day,
I'm going to hurry you slightly, Jeremy, because otherwise I'm going to have to wait for your autobiography to find out what happened next.
No, my parents went into the sweet shop, and the guy in the sweet shop said to my dad, "Oh, I hope your kids got home with a change." And he said, "What change?" And he explained. We went in with a $5, and my dad said to us, "What did you do?" And we said, "Well, we found £5, and we kept the change and all the rest." And he took the money we'd spent at the sweet shop out of our pocket money, and he put it into a £5 note, and we all went down to the police station, and we handed
finders, keepers, losers, weepers. So you handed it in, and they made a note of it. And did you get it back 28 days later? Because that was always the story we told each other.
We did.
Yes.
And we did.
There you go.
And I learned from that. And
What did you learn?
I learned that parents are the front line of policing, really, and should be.
That's a great line. Gosh.
And then they're not anymore.
Well, they are. I am. I'm sure you would be. What do you mean they're not anymore? There were kids back then whose dad would have taxed them the £5 and taken it straight down the bookies. I mean, you've got to resist this catastrophisation of everything. But yeah, the child who has been spared jail obviously has parents very much in that position, and the child not spared jail but spared sentencing, whereas the child with the referral order had parents who were clearly not the front line of policing. Thank you, Jeremy. Heather is in Crawley. Heather, what would you like to say?
Hi, first time caller. I shall probably bubble all my words now.
Don't be silly, it's only me.
It was just to tell you a story with my son, who's now a grown man. Him and his friends at school used to steal the lollipops from behind the blackboard at school and got told off, did this repeatedly, got told off. And then the teachers called me and his friend's parents in and said, they're really not taking you seriously. And my son, even from a toddler, had always been a bit of a magpie.
Yeah.
He'll take the low-down sweeties and I'll take him back to Sainsbury's and we do that. So we had a chat and decided that we were going to take them down to the police station. So we called the police station first.
You're not related to the last fella, are you?
No, I didn't.
Can I push you? So he'd stolen sweets from the school classroom, and you took him to the real police station.
Yeah. So we called the police because I was more concerned that they weren't taking it seriously, that they should not be doing this.
Wow.
So phoned the police first.
Yeah.
And said, "Could you just have a word with them?"
And they were up for it. They agreed to help you.
Bring them down. My son utterly dissolved on our way there, and I'm saying to him, "But Harry, you've been stealing, and this is what happens when you steal."
I like this.
I love you. I always love you. Oh my
God!
I'll
visit you in jail. I'll send you a cake. I'll send you cake. I won't. Yes.
But this is what we do. This is what we need to do. So we went in. Oh my God, James, it was horrific. I mean, this policeman took it really seriously.
Well, he had to.
Yeah, he did. And
did you have regrets?
Yeah, absolutely.
You started thinking, what have I done? I've traumatised the boy for life. Where is he now? Wormwood Scrubs.
Do you know where he is now? He's working for the police.
Oh, what? As a police officer or back office?
No.
And he's never committed another crime since.
No, not that I've found out. No.
I don't know. I mean, if you'd rung earlier, I'd have invited other contributors to comment on your parenting, I think, Heather, because
some could say it was quite harsh.
Yes.
But it was more the point that they weren't, the discipline they were getting from the school, they weren't taken seriously.
No, fair enough.
And we just thought, do you know what? There needs to be a consequence, because...
And it worked. And these days, I don't know the police would have the time. I don't know that the police station probably wouldn't be there anymore, depending on where you're living and the various other variables. But the fundamental lesson, I quite like, actually. I think I probably approve of. It's the kind of thing that my parents or my dad might have done. Thank you, Heather. Lydia's in Epsom. Lydia, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello, Lydia.
Lovely to speak to you. First time caller. A bit
Welcome.
nervous.
It's only me.
But I used to be on a youth referral panel.
Oh, yes.
And I was a volunteer, and I probably did it about 10 years ago now. I was quite young. I was only in my early 20s at the time. But I think the reason why they probably referred him for a referral order is because of the fact his mum hasn't able to perhaps give him the guidance.
Yeah.
And with because with the orders, you can have things like anger management programs, mediation, support for like alcohol or drugs misuse. You can even have an opportunity to write a letter to the victim and meet with the victim as well.
Wow.
So they do things like making bits and pieces for the community. And so I think they could probably see at home with the other chap that his mum or dad were able to kind of discipline him, and they were perhaps a little bit worried about the guy whose mum wanted to go away.
I think you've nailed it completely. And the problem is that without experiences like yours, we don't fully appreciate the role of rehabilitation in referral orders. We think of it as something that should involve punishment, whereas really it involves prevention. And the other lad didn't need prevention because everybody involved in the case was confident that this was not going to become part of a broader pattern. Whereas with the younger lad, particularly with the absent mother, they thought, crikey, if we don't nip this in the bud, who knows where it's going to lead.
Exactly, and that's the thing. It is a good program, to be honest, and I think it kind of helps a lot of kids. A lot of the kids that we saw, the parents weren't always as interested in the children, so it's about giving those guidance.
Yeah. You and I think, was it Chris working in the PRU, in the pupil referral unit?
Mm-hmm.
Yours are the voices that we need to hear more of. Not the kind of hang 'em and flog 'em and throw away the key brigade, but the recognition that these are young people whose lives are formative and they could go in either direction. Before you go, if I may, it's quite a young. What prompted you to join as a volunteer a board like this when you were so young?
So at the time, I'd done a law degree and I was working in insolvency.
Oh, yeah.
And I wasn't too sure what I wanted to do. I knew insolvency wasn't for me.
Right.
And I ended up going to work on this panel for 2 years as a volunteer. But now I work for a charity instead. So it's completely like a hospice, so completely different.
No, but you just, I get it. You wanted to feel a bit closer to the criminal justice system than you did in the insolvency side of things. Oh, lovely story. Thank you, Lydia. It's coming up to 12 noon. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, set to deliver her first conference speech since Labour took power in Liverpool shortly. We're not currently minded to take the whole thing. I can't remember what the precedents are. I don't think we've ever taken a Chancellor's speech at Labour conference or Tory conference before. But we will hopefully have an opportunity with Natasha Clark, who is in Liverpool, to pick over the key points of Rachel Reeves' imminent speech with some clips. But as things stand, the plan is not to take it in full, to broadcast it in its entirety. Not least because I'm drawn very much to a story about the shortage of tradesmen in this country. You will never guess how big the problem is.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 4 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm thinking of that call there. It was Andrew, wasn't it, in Crawley? I just noticed it's one of those little moments of, I don't know what it is. Is it clarity? Or he said, I got nicked a couple of times. It sounded like the most natural thing in the world. If I used the same language to describe my brushes with the law as a younger person, I'd sound fraudulent. I'd sound like I was sort of trying to cast myself as the lost Mitchell brother or something like that. I got nicked. I've never said that. I don't know why that one that one caught my eye. But I think we run a similar risk, we members of the middle class, when we turn our attention towards the trades. When we turn our attention towards the building trades. I've told you a few times that as a younger man, if we were having work done in the house, my wife would note that my accent went south at about 100 miles an hour. So she would find it hilarious. And I make conscious efforts now not to fall into the same trap, although an awful lot of workers in London are from overseas now, of course, not as many as were before we became the first population in the history of humanity to vote to impose economic sanctions on ourselves. But I don't find myself minded to fake a Polish accent or a Latvian accent when I'm speaking to builders in the way that I did when I was speaking to British builders, even more so I think sometimes at the car mechanics, which is not an environment in which I find myself very often. But you sort of, oh yeah, all right, yeah, oh yeah, I see, yeah, right. I was like, what's that you say? Yeah, all right, well, knock that down. Oh yeah. I think we'll be all right today. I don't think we're going to walk into this territory with our eyes closed. But Checkatrade, which is a good website, gives you lots of testimonials from clients of the service they've received from tradespeople. Checkatrade estimates that we are about 1.3 million skilled workers short for the decade ahead. And that in addition to that figure, we'll need 350,000 apprentices in order to meet demand in the next decade. So the task of finding a builder for even the simplest of projects is becoming an ever-increasing source of frustration. I've got work going on at the moment, actually, with a plumber rather than a builder. Actually, no, I've got both. I've got a builder and a plumber in the house today. And it's true. The pause between making a connection and getting the work to start is longer than it has ever been. We've been doing work for the best part of 2.5 years now. That's just what's saving up until we can afford to do the next bit. And 2.5 years ago, I think it would pretty much be a couple of weeks down the line, they'll come in and do the work. Now it can be a couple of months. You're booking ahead, and then of course if you've got changes going on, the pauses can get even worse because something goes wrong and you say, well, we can't have that done until we've got that done, and the business of doing up your house is more complicated than ever before. So I'm kind of interested in that, although I think, isn't that just the same phone call again and again and again? It's a bit like a parking tickets phone call or an immigration phone in. It's just everyone's going to say exactly the same thing. And we'll just have to sort of nod along. I could be wrong. Feel free to prove me wrong on that. But a conversation about the impact of it getting harder and harder to find a builder, even for the simplest of projects, is surely just going to be the same story 100 times. 450,000 householders now waiting more than a year to find a builder, 301,000 waiting a year for plumbers and heating engineers, 294,000 for a roofer, 274,000 for a carpenter. Bricklayers, plasterers, roofers and carpenters all added to, wait for it, the Home Office's shortage occupation list. Do you remember that? The liberty of motion list. We're going to abolish freedom of movement to stop people coming here, but they're going to leave such enormous holes in our workforce that we're going to have to give them special dispensations to come here. And I said to you some years ago that we'll end up in a place where it'll be easier to make a list of the people who aren't on the protected occupation or the shortage occupation list than it is on the people who will. The only difference between liberty of motion and freedom of movement will be that we don't get to join in. That Brits don't actually have the freedom of movement or the liberty of motion to go and work in other countries. It will just be people in other countries that have the liberty of motion to come here on the shortage occupation list. So even before today's statistics were published by Checkatrade, we had plasterers, bricklayers, roofers and carpenters on the shortage occupation list. So some of these workers, 377,000 of them no less, will be needed to replace those retiring. Another 734,000 would be the figure needed to meet current demand in the home improvement, repair and construction sectors. So the people who are now waiting up to a year for work would have their work done sooner if we had 734,000 more bricklayers, plasterers, roofers and carpenters. Another 200,000 jobs are likely to be needed due to the promised growth in housing. Of course, the government's house building programme will make all of these situations worse, will exacerbate all of these situations. So, I mean, the why of it is in one sense kind of obvious, isn't it? Why do we have such a huge shortage of tradespeople? And the answer is because people don't want to do it. There was an awful lot. It was one of the first little sniffs I got doing this job of race-related lies. Not necessarily racism, because if you believe a race-related lie, does that actually make you a racist? If somebody tells you lies about racists, or someone tries to turn people speaking foreign or tells lies about second languages in schools and you believe it, or if someone tells you that the reason why you can't see a GP is because of immigration and you believe it, does that make you a racist or just a victim of a racist liar? I don't know. But one of my first experiences of this was with regard to building. It would be people from the building trade ringing me up to complain that they were being undercut, and they did two things actually. It wasn't usually the people in the building trade actually. It was usually the friend of, or the partner of, or the cousin of. My friend's a builder and he can't get any work at all because all the Poles are coming here and doing it. And then you'd get the other calls saying, oh, they're so bad at it, I have to go in and fix the mess that they've made when they've finished. And you'd say, well, what are you complaining about then? The only person who loses out here is the customer, who has to pay twice. First for the Eastern Europeans to do a botched job, and then for you to go in and fix it. Unless, of course, you're lying. Perish the thought. And then you had the other observation, which never made you very popular at all, which was that these trades rely upon word-of-mouth recommendations. You might get a tiny bit of work if you're, fresh out of the blocks and setting yourself up as a builder, but every single builder I've employed in my life has come to me recommended by a friend. So if they're doing a rubbish job, you're not going to be getting the personal recommendations. We even once on our street had two builders, one Eastern European, one British, working on exactly the same job, doing two loft conversions at more or less the same spec, at more or less the same time. And again, it was pretty easy to tell who was working harder and longer on the loft conversion and who was not. I'll leave you to draw your own conclusions. So it was one of the first little introductions I got to how easy it is to get a race-related lie halfway round the world before the truth had even got its trousers on. And partly as a consequence of this, we have ended up with huge shortages, because what was Brexit designed to do but to tell lots and lots of people to clear off, to go home, and lots and lots of people did. But why? Why haven't these holes been filled? And it's oddly, for me at least, it's slightly weather-related. Don't look at me like that. I don't know what you felt like this morning when you got up and you saw how miserable it was. Possibly it wasn't miserable in your part of the world, but it was miserable in mine. I'm quite keen at the moment on cycling into work if I can, on one of those line bikes with the batteries on them, but I'm not doing it if it's raining. And I looked out today, I looked out the window this morning, I thought, oh, flipping heck. It was really, you could tell it was really binning it down last night as well, because the dog came upstairs into our room, which only ever happens during storms. And oddly, when I turned the page of my newspaper this morning and saw this story, join the queue. Do you want a builder? Join the queue. UK seeks 1.3 million more tradesmen. And I found myself thinking, oh, crikey, yeah. Because in the middle of summer, you find yourself thinking, well, the money's good now, isn't it? For a brickie or for a carpenter if you're on the building sites. A day like today, you're up on a roof when it's raining or when it's freezing cold. How much of that is the reason why we've got huge shortages? So what I want to know is, because one of the phrases I found most unkind and unthinking during a lot of the race-related rhetoric surrounding Brexit, and people who really should have known better use this phrase a lot. They used to say, we must train our own, which is a profoundly jingoistic and xenophobic thing to say. Imagine if you were a doctor just coming to the end of a merciless shift, and you hear some person on the radio saying, we need to train our own, we have to stop relying on foreign doctors. And you think to yourself, why the fudge do I bother? Why do I bother looking after people? Why do I bother burning the candle at both ends in a country full of pundits and politicians who think we should train our own because they don't want people like me holding up their NHS? That phrase, we should train our own, so ugly, really. And yet we don't, and we're not. And I want to know why, okay? I want to know how much of it is it's bloody hard work and people don't fancy it. And I wonder whether people in the trade who don't want their children to follow them would be the best ones to describe that to me. I've got a mate who's a butcher, and last time I saw him, his son was a butcher. I saw him on Friday, and I said, how's your boy? Is he still a butcher? And he said, no, he's knocked it on the head. He doesn't want to turn into a grumpy old butcher like his dad. And I kind of felt that there was a bit of approval there. I don't really want him to turn into a grumpy old butcher like me either. And in the trades, you don't want your son to follow you into the trade. You don't want your daughter to follow you into the trade because it's bloody hard work. That's the bottom line. The building site I worked on, which I mentioned far too often, in Doncaster in 1988, was the fellow that owned the little building company in South Yorkshire was a family friend. he didn't want his son to follow him into the building trade, even though he had a cracking little business going there, really good going concern. But he didn't want his son to do it because it's well, there are connotations attached, aren't there? There are connotations attached, socio-ed, class, snobbishness. Hyacinth Bouquet wouldn't have wanted any of her family to be tradespeople, even if they earned twice as much as they would have done in a white-collar job. But when we look at this shortage, 0345 60 973, and when we look also at the number of people not in work, and I'm thinking more of traditional unemployed rather than long-term sick, there's a mystery here. Why aren't more people going into the building trades? And how much of it is down to the simple fact that it's blooming hard work. And we don't like blooming hard work. We don't want to have a bad back in our 40s or our 50s. We don't want to be suffering from arthritis or various other conditions. We don't want to run the risk of falling off a ladder. So that's what I mean. Because one of the elephants in the room with regard to immigration in general, it's not an elephant in the room, but one of the things that suffers most from the absence of nuance is the simple fact that the healthier our economy is, or the wealthier a population is, the choosier the members of that population can be. But that doesn't really work with us when we're looking at the cost of living crisis. Why aren't people queuing up to do these jobs? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need, because I don't know what the alternative is. Do you see what I mean? When I read about long-term unemployed, or when I read about NEETs, young people who are not in education, employment or training, and you sort of think, well, what is your life? We did a phone-in about it a couple of weeks ago. What is it? Are you just relying on 20 quid, well, 50 quid off your dad to go out on Friday night, and the rest of the time you're in your room surfing the internet or playing video games? Why is there not a queue of people wanting to do this skilled and well-paid work? Is it because of social change and the idea that it's just not for me? I couldn't do it. I'll tell you that now. If I had to, I would, but I'd be rubbish at it. I'd get a little bit better as the years passed, but I'd still be rubbish at it. I'm not very well coordinated. I'm not a very physically robust. Well, I'm physically robust. I'm not unhealthy, but I wouldn't be very good at it. I try and do DIY. I watch the YouTube videos and then I bodge it up. And other people don't. I got friends that do it, and they get the. I tried to fix a garden chair the other day, and the screw came out the other end. So the screw was longer. I took the screw to the DIY shop, gave it to the fella. He gave me one, said it's a bit shorter. Is that all right? I said yes. And then I put it in the and I twisted the Allen key, and I heard a splintering noise, and I thought that's a bit odd. And I carried on twisting, and then I realised that the screw was coming out the other side, because the screws in the bit of the chair that I'd lost were a bit shorter than the screws in the bit of the chair that I'd removed to take it to the DIY shop in order to get a replacement. So that kind of thing. I'd be rubbish at it. So, but why isn't there a queue? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It's 12:19.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Rachel Reeves in front of the Labour conference in Liverpool. Natasha Clark is there and will hopefully be able to run us through the salient points before Sheila joins you at 1 o'clock today. If the clock defeats us, I'm sure Natasha will join Sheila with a similar brief. But I tell you what, Rachel Reeves would be delighted if we could suddenly conjure up the 1.3 million people that we need to plug holes in our building trade at the moment. That's over a decade-long period, but the numbers of shortages are so great already in the present day that the entire list, really, of people you might encounter on a building site, the brickies, the plasterers, the roofers, the carpenters, have all been added to the Home Office's shortage occupation list, or the don't mention the liberty of motion list, as we predicted on this programme we would have sooner rather than later. 12:22 is the time. Max is in Leeds. Max, what's going on?
Hi, James. Big fan. Just started your book, actually.
Thank you, mate.
And I'm not nervous because it's only you, but
Exactly,
I'm just lying
right.
because
Exactly.
I am nervous.
No, it's only me.
So I'm 19. I'm currently doing a degree apprenticeship. It's not in the construction industry, but I have got friends in the construction industry. I spent time with them in Manchester recently, actually, and I was catching up with them.
Oh, yeah.
And one of my mates who's an apprentice, who is an electrician, he's just talking to me, and we're sort of comparing degree apprenticeship sort of thing, where his isn't a degree, but his is an apprenticeship. And he's saying, the way he's getting treated on site about, I guess you could call it higher up. So, it's sort of, it's not bullying, but, it's the sort of banterous bullying, I guess you could call it.
Banterous bullying, yes, I know what you mean.
Yeah, and I think that, that's got a big part of it, because...
Well, that would be a small... I don't know if it's a big part of it, because you're talking about people who actually start it and get put off it.
Yeah, I guess that is, there's that. Word of mouth, I know now that I don't want to be if everything.
So then the people who know people who started it and don't like it tell people don't start it.
Yeah,
I hadn't thought of that. I had not thought of that.
I wouldn't want to do it now after hearing, that sort of thing. And there might be people who think, it is just banter and stuff like that. But if you're having to go through it every single day, and, you're on a very low wage as well, and you're doing all of these jobs, like you said, in the rain, it's not great. It's not a great environment. I
get that. That makes perfect sense to me. And I think that, the health consequences of that and some of the other issues involved would prompt a parent to probably want something different for their own child. I want you to work indoors, son, for example,
exactly.
and with a bit of central heating, ideally, and a roof over your head.
That'd be nice, wouldn't it? Yeah, I think not only that, I think also another thing is that the alternative options are much easier. I mean, there's so many degree apprenticeship options now. I'm doing one in accountancy. I went to university, didn't like it.
Okay.
Chose a degree apprenticeship, and I'm enjoying it at the moment. And then, there's also university is much easier to get into these days. There's so many more options. I'm not saying that for all, but as in most of my mates have gone to university, whereas if you go back, before...
Yeah, but I'm not thinking about them. I'm thinking about the people who aren't working. I'm thinking about younger people who aren't doing anything. They're not in education, employment or training. And why would they not want to queue up and do something like this, which is relatively well paid?
Yeah, I guess it is just word of mouth. I mean, like my mate who told me how rubbish he's finding it, it's probably...
He's being bullied, right? I mean, we can use the word banter a lot, but he's got that dreadful... He's got that rock in the bottom of his tummy on his way to work every morning because he doesn't enjoy the way that he gets talked to and talked about, and it's not character forming.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah, and then there's the late. He gets given a lot of responsibility. From what he told me, they don't do an awful lot. A lot gets put onto him, and it's just sort of, he's not really respected for it. And because he's in the apprentice, he's, the sort of vulnerable one, so it's a bit easier to, find things.
Yeah, and that would put you off. It's like going back to school and being a few years behind the lads at the back of the bus. He says someone who never, ever caught a bus to school in his life. But you take my point. Max, good luck with your studies. Degree apprenticeships. A way forward, but not, it would seem, in the building trade. Richard is in Southampton. Richard, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, I just wanted to say how hard it is. I was just talking to the girl on the phone. Like, I'm absolutely broken. I need 2 knee replacements, and I do roofing, which I'm not going to have done. I get chest infections constantly. It is such a hard game. It really is. Actually punishing, and like today, it's been hammering down, so we can't work. You lose so much time through like bad weather and all that sort of stuff. So that's why, and the youngsters do not want to get in it.
Well, you can't blame them, can you?
No, I don't. Well, my son, he went to college mechanic 2 years, and he come out, couldn't get a job. So he come back with me, working for. I said, right, give it a year, see how you get on. If you fancy it, but I said, but it's my wife. Like she said, don't get him in the game because it's punishing.
Yeah, really, physically. Physically, it is. It's a trial.
Honestly, you wouldn't understand. I've been climbing ladders for 40 years.
Yeah.
Right. And it really, it just finishes you. You think, right, I'm only 58, but I'm actually like a busted bloke.
I'm sorry to hear that, but I do understand. The mystery is though that the job hasn't changed. So when you were in your teens and your 20s, when you started out, there were lots of people starting out, even though the people that were 58, 59 then would have been in the same state that you're in now. So something's shifted in the context of that queue. Go on.
I think for like the youngsters, it is they're too busy on their computers and on their phones and the rest of it. So they're not. But we didn't have that years ago, did we? So,
but they've still. You've got to do a job at some point, regardless of how much time.
Do they?
No, well, I don't know.
Like, well, you've heard about the stats about like people not working no more, and people can't be bothered.
Well, not a lot of them are people like you who are broken. But the younger people, it's not a question that they can't be bothered. It's like the last one would rather be an accountant. You'd rather your son was working in a garage undercover, not out in all.
I would too, but I would. I don't want him doing what he's doing now.
And it's not like when you're a tiny bit older than me, but when we were young and we had mates on income support and housing benefit, you could live, you had a decent life while you were waiting for something to come along that you really wanted to do. That's not true anymore. There's no kind of I'm living on welfare until my band gets signed, or I'm living on welfare until. That does. So I don't know what they do, Richard, and I really don't. And yet, as you say, you wouldn't fancy it. You just, if you was, what would you do if I could give you your time again?
Do you know what? I wouldn't know.
Well, have a think.
Really
Go on.
I really wouldn't know. I mean,
no. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's it then. Maybe the younger generation just feel they've got more choices.
I left school when I was 14.
Gosh.
And because I just didn't want to do it anymore. And when I started working with my dad, he was in the same sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And he's broken as well.
Oh,
he's still alive, by the way.
Yeah, well, that's a relief. And what do you think is going to happen to your boy? Do you think he's going to stick at it?
Well, you can earn good money at it.
I know you can.
But it's like punishing. That's what it does. It's all right. Earning a good few quid. I mean, I've got a decent house where I live. I've got everything I ever want. Yeah. But I can't enjoy it.
Say, no, because you're
I'm knackered.
Technical term there from Richard. I'll tell you something for nothing to bring class into the conversation again. Anybody you hear in my line of work whining and moaning about why we can't train our own to do work like the work Richard has been doing for 40 years, I will bet you every penny in my current account that they're not talking about their own children. I don't know how pertinent or how relevant that is, but whenever you hear somebody from my background, class or profession banging on in the context usually of immigration about why can't we train our own? Why can't we train our own? Why can't we train our own? They're not talking about their own children. They might well be talking about yours. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:35 is the time. Christina writes, this is a theme here. My friend's husband is a roofer. He has his own business and they've done very well for themselves. But he's 61 now and his knees are almost completely knackered. He can't walk far, unlike my husband who's almost 68 but had an office job. And has intact knees. My friend's son has gone into the family business. I don't think he ever really considered doing anything else. And I'm getting this a lot, Dave. I nothing but love for you, mate. I'll tell you, James, the building trade is very hard manual work. I've been in it all my life, but I've had to give it up, mush. Back and knees just packed up, mate. I can't even bend over the bath to wash my hair now. It is very satisfying work to stand back and say, I built that, but my goodness me. And Sim suggests that it's to do with the... Well, I don't know. This doesn't explain shortages, Sim, but I'll read it out anyway because you've paid me the courtesy of sending it in. My husband is a carpenter, highly skilled, well-trained, and he's done it for years. He's relatively young at 38. However, people do not want to pay the price for quality work. That's the main issue. It's not the main issue with respect of why there are huge shortages in the carpentry trade, unless, of course, you're suggesting that the wages are too low, which rather flies in the face of some of the other analysis. 12:36 is the time. Jochen is in Truro in Cornwall. Jochen, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Oh.
I was listening to this rather closely. I was a restoration builder for 25 years and stopped working in the trade 4 years ago. Mirrored a lot of the points that other callers were making, other comments in the text about the physical toll it takes, the lack of, I think, remuneration for the effort that you put in, a lot of hours outside of actually job. But something I noticed really, James, was I came from very low education, not a family with means, and I was always conscious that I was doing things for other people that I was never going to be able to achieve myself. So I was working for people, making nice houses, working in wonderful areas, and then going back to substandard rented accommodation. And emotionally, it was really taxing.
Gosh.
So I think it's really difficult if we're asking young people to get into these trades, and they're all so aware how difficult it's going to be for them to ever achieve home ownership themselves. I think, again, it goes back to, you talked in the past about breaking the social contract between young people getting into housing or...
I think the phone's gone.
No, I'm.
Oh no, you're still there. Sorry. I've got a problem here because I keep coming back to the same question, and it obviously isn't the right question to be asking, Jochen. Because I'm thinking, I've got in my mind a mythical army of young people who aren't doing anything, and who are choosing to do nothing, as opposed to doing some of the things that are less than perfect. But I'm looking at the cost of living crisis. I'm looking at GDP per capita, and I'm thinking, well, no one. And I'm looking at what you can reasonably expect to get on the welfare state these days, and I think, well, no one can be comfortable while doing nothing. So, who are the young people that I'm thinking of? Where are the young people that I'm thinking of?
Well, I haven't met any of them, and I'm not sure they exist in any significant number, James.
And yet the statistics keep telling us that they do exist.
Right. I mean, I can only tap on my own personal experiences. Of course. We're actually fixing up an old cottage at the moment, which is, it was a hoarder's cottage for 55 years and has no kitchen or bathroom.
Right.
And for about 6 weeks now, I've had a few different labourers come, local, chaps in the community. And they've done a couple of days, and they've essentially said, you know what, it's really hard work. I'm going to keep doing my shift at the pub, or I'm going to do something else. And
so they're not working; they're just doing less taxing work, even possibly for less money. But the calculation they've made is that this is a mugs game.
Exactly. But the enthusiasm before they started with the idea of coming and working alongside someone who was formerly a tradesman, picking up skills. It was something that really motivated them to come and start the job, but then coming and seeing what it was like, they were less keen to actually stick it out.
Yeah. That's where we started, and that could be almost all of the mystery, couldn't it? Is that it is really, really hard work. There's the physical, but you've actually brought the emotional to the front as well, which I hadn't thought of before.
Well, it's a big part. If you're looking at career paths nowadays, I think young people are thinking about 25 years, 30 years down the line. So, we have to give them more than just this empty promise of, okay, you've got a career, but you're going to be broken at 55.
And that's what I mean. That is
retirement if you've saved any money, and you certainly won't have a home of your own. You'll just have built lots of other people.
I'm going to read you a message from Matt Jochen, because I don't get messages like this very often, and well, if I do, it's a moment. He's written, "Crikey, this bloke's just nailed it, James. I'd never thought about it like that before." And there it is. I mean, there's so many different answers to the question. I don't know whether Darren has got his tongue in his cheek or whether he is auditioning for Idiot's Corner. He says, young people just can't be bothered. It's easy to work. They're choosing a YouTube life. They want to be rich for doing nothing. Make them be chimney sweeps again. Yeah, I think that's Idiot's Corner, isn't it? But that combination of the physical graft, I don't think we've heard the word knackered on the programme as often as we have today, and it's not being used to describe just exhaustion. It's being used to describe a breaking of the body, coupled with Jochen's description of the sort of morale-sapping experience of providing a living environment into which you will never be able to live, plus young people weighing up their options. And he prompted me to break the habit of a lifetime and do some actual research. So, according to the Office of National Statistics, there's an estimated 320,000 young people aged between 16 and 24 who are in none of the above. They're not in education, employment or training. They are economically inactive young people, not in education, employment or training. That's who I'm thinking of. But if you break that down into men and women, and I know, of course, women can work in the building trade as well, but they are, I think we can all agree, less likely to. Then you're looking at about 200,000 people who are young men, of whom I don't know how many would contemplate the building trade until they realise what it's actually like. But there it is. Well, I mean, it's just not work I want to do, is the abiding answer to the question of why is there not a queue for this kind of work. Jochen, stay safe. Glenn's in Dulwich. Glenn, what would you like to say?
Well, I'm not in the building trade. I know it's a lot more harder graft. I'm an engineer, refrigeration.
Oh, yeah.
I've been doing about 20 years. Okay?
Yeah.
Training. First of all, when I was first taken on, I worked for a company, and I think I was training for about 6 months or a year with all the older guys before they let me out loose on my own.
Yeah.
Okay? A lot of the newer companies now, they'll take a guy on. I can give him 6 weeks training, I don't know, somewhere in Milton Keynes, and then chuck him out on the road and say, there you go, do 8 jobs a day.
Okay.
You can't do it. It's impossible. Yeah.
But I mean, you need to help me out then here, because if that's my business, then I'm an idiot.
Most of them are.
Well, no, but you say that, but I wouldn't be in business. I wouldn't be in business anymore.
No, when I say I'm talking like the big manufacturers. I don't want to name names.
No,
so
I know.
If you buy a fridge, they go on numbers. Yeah.
Yeah.
They might say to you, right, 8 jobs a day you got to do, and the guy might try and knock out 6 or 7. What he does, he walks in, he orders parts. He goes back to the office or whatever. Then that's the way they work. Yeah. And like I said, even so if I no longer do contract work, I just go out. People find me on the internet. Like if you got trading platforms where they might, I don't know, call up an engineer. Another thing as well, we live in a gig economy. People don't want to pay the going rate. You see, they ring me up, say to me, "Do you charge a call-out charge?" I go, "Yes," straight away. They put the phone down.
Right.
Or they'll go for the guy.
But none of this explains why young people aren't applying to do the jobs, does it?
I ain't got a clue, mate. But I'm telling you why all the guys are leaving. I don't know why.
Sorry, you should have said so at the beginning.
Yeah, I don't know. Yes. I don't know why, but I know that I wouldn't do it if I was starting again.
And it was a better job when you were starting out.
Yeah. I still earn a good money, but like I said,
well, that's everything. That's I mean, that is and somebody somewhere is sitting on their backside, taking a slice off the top of every single job that you do, in return for their investment and that has got measurably worse over the last 40 years. It's not an endorsement of communism. It's just saying that Glenn should get to keep more of his call-out charge than he currently does, because it's going to the hedge fund or the investment company that owns the business, or it's going to the shareholders. Just a better balance. Glenn, thank you. I don't know what you're apologising for, Vivian. Vivian writes, "I'm very sorry," and "very" is in capital letters, "but I do not believe that young people do not want to work. Nor do I. That's the whole point of this conversation." Vivian goes on, "The apprenticeships are not easy to find." I know, you're absolutely right. That's what we've been saying since 12 o'clock this afternoon. But there is an element of not wanting to do the kind of work that all the people doing it have described to us in fairly unattractive terms. Very, very, very considerately, Rachel Reeves has brought her speech to the Labour Party conference in bang on 12:45, which means we'll be able to find out from Natasha Clark after this what Rachel Reeves has said.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:48. The first speech to a party conference by a Labour Chancellor in, goodness knows, about 14 years, 15 years? I speak of Rachel Reeves in Liverpool. Natasha Clark is there to talk us through the salient points. Natasha, over to you.
James, it's been a pretty jubilant atmosphere so far at the Labour Party conference here in Liverpool, and like you say, everybody is pretty delighted to hearing from the first Labour Chancellor in 14 years. She promised no return to austerity. She was going to keep her manifesto commitments, and there were huge cheers in the room for some of the policies that she promised in the election campaign: tax crackdown, abolishing non-doms, and that VAT on private schools, which of course has got everybody talking. But at first she had to fight off resistance from this heckler.
Just ask the Conservatives. They paid the price for their incompetence, their dishonesty and their rule breaking.
We are still selling arms to Israel. I thought we were voting for change, Rachel. Climate breakdown is on our doorstep. And we are still backing down.
change Labour Party, a Labour Party that represents working people, not a party of protest.
It seems to happen every year at conferences. More and more hecklers manage somehow to get into the room, and I was told by somebody yesterday that security is so much tighter here in Liverpool, but yet still an Israel-Gaza protester on arms managed to get through. Nowhere near Rachel Reeves. However, obviously we'll remember last year when Keir Starmer got attacked by that glitter protester, so luckily no such breaches of security in that respect. But the row that's of course dominating here in Liverpool is of course over winter fuel. The unions are so angry about it. Labour MPs privately and even Labour Party officials very upset about this decision to cut winter fuel. Today Rachel Reeves doubled down on it, insisting she had absolutely no choice thanks to the mess the Tories left us in.
I know that not everyone in this hall or in the country will agree with every decision that I make. But I will not duck those decisions. Not for political expediency, not for personal advantage. Faced with that £22 billion black hole that the Conservatives left this year, and with a triple lock ensuring that the state pension will rise by an estimated £1,700 over the course of this Parliament, I judged it the right decision in the circumstances that we inherited.
And of course, James, she had the really unenviable job of trying to brighten up what is, of course, a doom and gloom message ahead of the budget. We know it's going to be painful. Keir Starmer keeps on telling us that. But Rachel Reeves looked like she had the cat that got the cream, really. She was grinning from ear to ear as she was delivering some of her speech earlier today. She'd clearly been told, put on a bit of a positive spin on this because we need to hear some hope, some optimism to inject that back into our politics. And that's very much the message of, I think, what Rachel Reeves was trying to say today, and it is a really hard message for her to put across. How can it be so doom and gloom? You're going to have to inflict these huge cuts on us. You have to cut winter fuel payments for pensioners at the same time as offering that message of change, of hope. Something really difficult for her, but she promised that unlike the Conservatives, she was going to get back trust in politics.
We were elected because for the first time in almost 2 decades, people looked at us, looked at me, and decided that Labour could be trusted with their money. That is more than a political choice or a single line in any manifesto. It is about our values. Because we saw what happened 2 years ago when governments play fast and loose with the public finances. When the prices of food and housing and energy soar, it is working people with mortgages, rents and bills to pay who suffer the consequences. Well, I will not take that risk. I will repay the trust that people put in us.
So Rachel Reeves' first speech seems to have gone down pretty well in the hall. She got multiple rounds of applause, some very excited people. Her event ticketed, queues around the block as you'd expect. Not everybody can get in that room to hear from the new Chancellor. But of course, lots of rows dominating this conference. I know you've had a lot to say about the donation story on your show over the past few days, but people are still talking about it here, James. And Rachel Reeves obviously going to get asked about it a lot in the next few days and about whether it will overshadow her message. I think still yet to be seen, but lots of people, lots to say. A very interesting conference so far.
So we don't learn, and this is normal. It's a month and a week until the budget on the 30th of October. Not really much there to point towards what we might expect substantively or surprise-wise in that budget.
So she promised no return to austerity. That's something that she's been saying all along. She said she was going to keep her manifesto commitments not to raise income tax, VAT, national insurance. Those are not going to go up. However, everything is still on the table. She promised she was going to look at investment. She said that was going to be the key to unlocking growth. So I think we'll be hearing a little bit more from the Chancellor in the next few days, potentially in the next few weeks, in the run-up to that budget, about what that investment will be. There are people in the Department for the Ministry of Justice hope that's going to be more investment for prisons. There are people in the Department for Health hope it's going to be more investment for hospitals. But yes, at the moment, Rachel Reeves very much pitch rolling ahead of her very first budget. And like I say, trying to get that very delicate tightrope back from offering a bit of a hope and optimism and saying that we can fix some of these really deep-rooted issues that obviously are affecting us up and down our country. But at the same time, she has been left, what she says, a dire inheritance. So yes, not many clues about what's going to be in the budget, but we are expecting to hear more from her in the next few days and weeks.
And did you mention the breakfast clubs in primary schools?
I think she did mention the breakfast clubs and primary schools in her speech. She also mentioned VAT, she mentioned the tax crackdown, the nom-doms. Essentially, this is a bit of a more flesh on the bones of all the kind of things that we saw in the election campaign. There's not a lot of new real detail from it. It's all about sort of this messaging, I think, that the Labour Party are trying to position themselves. They're obviously the party of government. They're trying to get their comms message right, and some people arguably saying that they're not getting it right at the moment. But yeah, I think, overall, I think that Rachel Reeves' team will be quite pleased with their round of media interviews that they've had today, and they're hoping, obviously, that this speech, her first to the Labour Party conference, will help slightly move the conversation away from this donors' row and onto the substantive issue of economics.
Finally, Natasha, just run us through the calendar for the rest of conference, will you? What are the next big moments?
So, really, to be honest with you, James, the next big moment is going to be tomorrow with Keir Starmer's speech. It's tomorrow afternoon, 2:00. It will be, obviously, like I say, his first speech to the Labour Party conference in government. And I'm told that his speech is already looking quite long, around an hour, some people are saying already. So I hope you're ready and buckled in. However, he has not been working on it all the time. He was holed up, I'm told, in his suite watching the Arsenal game yesterday. So still a little bit of time for football.
Natasha Clark live from Liverpool. Whereas you heard the Labour Party conference, first conference in government for goodness knows how long, best part of a decade and a half, is underway. It's a pet subject of mine, that primary school breakfast clubs. I think she did announce a pilot to launch in April. There's quite a good article about it on the Schools Week that I will retweet shortly. It was a manifesto pledge, of course, and now we learn that the pilot will launch in April. It just, of all the times we've talked about problems in schools, problems that young people face, problems like delinquent parenting, actually, which we talked about in the last hour. The prospect of children arriving at school hungry has always seemed to me to be one of the first things you'd have to fix if you're serious about fixing anything and or everything else. And there it is. It is 12:56. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Shall we squeeze back to the conversation about young people and the building trade and the enormous levels of shortages, which don't make much sense until you take into account the possibility that it's back-breaking work, and young people, if they've got any choice in the matter at all, don't generally want to do it. Helen is in Manchester. Helen, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. I worked for several years in apprenticeship recruitment.
Oh, yes.
So my job was literally to go around companies and try and get people, not just young people, anybody who really wanted to get on courses and get qualified. A lot of the time in jobs that they were already doing.
Oh,
so
yeah.
a lot of the time it was just backing up the skills that they, or a lot of the time, already had and getting the qualification to go with it.
Right.
I didn't work specifically in the building trade.
No,
I did a lot more in hospitality.
yeah.
It's all the same structure.
Yes.
And the number one reason why I would have people say no thanks, I don't want the free qualification, I don't want the qualification that the government's going to pay for, was something called functional skills.
Go on.
Which are the requirement within an apprenticeship to do maths and English if you don't already have a certain level at GCSE. And I would see it time and time again, particularly young people maybe starting out, in a kitchen or starting out in customer service. And their employers, they're really trying to get them on board with doing the qualification as well. And if you went through school and you were terrible at maths and terrible at English, but maybe you were really good at practical subjects, you were excellent at home economics, you were amazing at, kind of woodwork, metalwork, the technical subjects, then you are going to be drawn to doing a very practical job, I think.
And if I
at home economics and you want to be a chef, you then
shouldn't
want to go
matter
into
really.
an
I mean,
apprenticeship
maths
as a
is a
chef.
big
And
part of home economics. But so if I haven't got these qualifications, then I can't get onto the official apprenticeship.
You can get onto the apprenticeship, but you have to do what are called functional skills, which are kind of GCSE equivalent.
Yeah, okay. So I've got to go back to school, as it were.
Yeah, for a lot of people, that's just so off-putting to them. Maths in particular seem to be the one that put a lot of people off.
Yeah, I mean, it's a brilliant point, and it's obviously one from personal experience, but I'd kind of want the fella building my house or cooking my dinner to be quite good at maths.
I'm not saying that functional skills aren't important.
How many bricks are we going to stick in that wall?
I'm not saying that I don't think that they shouldn't be included within an apprenticeship.
No, you're explaining.
What I do think is, particularly for maybe level 2 apprenticeship, which are, the lower down level, I don't think they should be included at that point. I think if somebody's got that drive to get onto a qualification...
I think you're right. I think you're almost certainly right. You've introduced me to this problem.
You should give them that first year off from maths and English.
I hear you. I've got to have to stop you there because Sheila's here. Thank you, Helen. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Swarbrick will be with you at 4, but now on LBC, it's Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.